Chapter 252. Maticles was completely obsessed with mathematics and did not care about worldly affairs. Mentodicus, on the other hand, was different. He was not averse to spending time dealing with various matters. Moreover, mathematics had given him a meticulous mind, allowing him to manage the research institute, arrange personnel, and formulate plans with ease. This was why Devers appointed him as the dean of the research institute. Maticles raised both hands in agreement. "I'll think about it," Mentodicus replied cautiously. "I understand the principle of this ballista." At this time, Maticles came in front of Devers excitedly, pointed at the blueprint and said excitedly, "Look at this! Look at this! The most important parts of this ballista are the string made of strong animal tendons, and the pulley that can save effort in pulling the string. Also, look at the longer the chute, the farther the range will be. This is because the string will be pulled as far as possible, and the rebound force will be greater. I think the people of Syracuse are stupid. They only used one pulley, which is too simple and very laborious to use. In fact, if we make a set of pulleys and fix them at the end of the chute, it will be easy to pull the string to the end of the chute. Give me the best carpenters and materials, and I will soon be able to make a better ballista than them." Maticles' confident expression satisfied Devers. He smiled and said, "I have just told Mentodicus that I will let the mechanics of the Army's engineering battalion go to the Mathematics Institute to be your assistant. Also, Dionia has the best cattle in the entire Western Mediterranean, the Lucanian cattle. They can provide you with a large amount of high-quality beef tendons at any time." "That's great," Maticles said and walked out with the blueprint. "Maticles, I have an idea." Devers hurriedly stopped him. "If the ballista can accurately know the landing point of the stone before it is shot, it will be very helpful for the operator to accurately hit the target." This. Martichores and Mentodicus did not feel that Divers' suggestion was an extra burden. Instead, they fell into deep thought. "I have another idea," Devers said seriously. "I think that no matter how much force we use or how much angle we use to throw an object, the trajectory of the object in the air should be like this." Devers stretched out his finger and drew different arcs in the air. Martyres and Mentodicus stared at the Devers' fingers as if they were deep in thought. "If there's no wind and the ground is at the same level, with the highest point of the thrown object's trajectory as the center, the trajectories of the two sides should be able to overlap," Divers said in a calm tone. However, the two of them seemed to have been struck by lightning, and their expressions suddenly became extremely excited. Lord Consul, is this another revelation from Hades?" Mentodicus stammered. Similar situations had occurred several times in the past. When Divers talked with them, he would occasionally come up with some new ideas. After being verified, they were all correct. Every time, they would achieve breakthroughs in the research of mathematical theory, and it would greatly expand their knowledge. "You can think of it that way." Devers smiled mysteriously. Come. Show me the trajectory now." Maticles grabbed Devers's hand excitedly and walked out without saying anything. Devers understood what he meant. The floor of the living room was paved with marble, so of course, it could only be drawn on the mud in the courtyard. Therefore, they followed him out of the living room. "Mother, come over and look. What is Father doing in the garden with his people? They trampled on your flowers." Cynthia pointed at the three Devers in the courtyard and shouted from the window of the bedroom on the second floor. "Shh." Christoia made a shushing gesture and whispered, "Don't wake your brother up." She came to the window and looked down. Her eyebrows furrowed slightly, then she turned around and smiled. "Nothing, it's just your father and a few uncles discussing mathematical problems." Although Christoia loved flowers, she was a sensible woman and would never embarrass her husband in public. "What is mathematics?" Adoris asked curiously. "It's a very interesting knowledge. Your sister will soon learn it," Christoia said softly with a smile. "Can I go to school too?" Adoris asked longingly. "Of course." Kristoya caressed his head. But you're still young. You have to wait for another year. I don't want to. I want to go to school with my sister now. Adoris said unhappily. Brother, stop it. Listen to mother, or I won't let father read you stories at night. Hearing this, although Adoris pouted, he quieted down. Mother, is it really okay for me to go to school and study with other boys? Cynthia said hesitantly to Kristoya. Cynthia was 7 years old now. According to Greek tradition, girls could be married at 16. She already knew a lot. Her biological mother had taught her how to be a good woman in a Greek family since she was young. In her memory, her mother had never left the house. Now, she had to study with many boys in public, day after day, year after year. This made her a little uneasy. Kristoya pulled Cynthia in front of her and combed her slightly messy hair. She said gently, Child, do you know how lucky you are? Other than Dionia, there are girls like you in other Greek city-states. They spend most of their lives in their houses, busy raising children and managing the house. They don't know what the outside world is like. They haven't watched sports, they haven't enjoyed plays, they haven't even seen the sea. Do you want your life to be like theirs? Cynthia shook her head with a look of fear. Kristoya continued with emotion, Your father is a great man. He spent a lot of effort to convince the Senate to let you girls have the same opportunities as boys. At that time, you won't be the only one going to school. There will be girls from other citizen families. Cynthia, you won't be alone in school. You have to study hard and prove that we women are not worse than men. Don't let your father's efforts go to waste. Cynthia nodded, not really understanding. In fact, although the social customs of the newly rising Dionia Union were different from other Greek city-states, and they were more open to women, when the Devers proposed to the Senate to let girls and boys go to school together, many senators opposed it. The Devers were able to convince them. There was a paragraph that resonated with everyone. Let Dionia citizen girls also enter school. Let them learn more knowledge and skills, learn how to live in harmony with boys. Knowledge will make them more cultured, more elegant, and more intelligent. When they grow up and get married, they will have more common topics and hobbies with their husband. This will reduce the possibility of their husbands going out to seek pleasure in brothels and ensure the stability of the family. They will be more intelligent in managing family affairs and will not be deceived by cunning slaves. They will be able to raise their children better. It is crucial for the future citizens of Dionia to develop good habits at an early age. Since there were no electric lights in this era, most people went to bed when it was dark, except for a few rich people who used candles to continue working. Since they went to bed early, they got up early in the morning. Usually, people would get up after the rooster crowed. But for the hard-working people of Dionia, most of them got up even earlier. They would get up before the sun rose and the stars were still shining in the night sky to prepare for work after sunrise. Only children did not like to get up early. They would only wash up when their parents urged them. But today, 13-year-old Patroclus got up very early. He hurriedly washed up and helped his mother bake bread. This made her very happy. Her naughty son had really grown up after experiencing the invasion of Crotone. At the dining table, his mother asked with concern again, Cross, you really don't want me to send you two to school? Patroclus shook his head like a rattle. No. When the bad guys of Crotone came, I was alone sending letters to the nearby villages to report to the police. Even Uncle Aguilas praised me as a warrior. I'm already so old, and the school is in the city. How embarrassing it would be if I still need you to send me. But, as soon as his slightly worried mother said this, she was interrupted by Patroclus's father, Paliandalus. Let him go alone. Paliandalus looked at Patroclus with a serious expression. When you get to school, listen to the teacher. Do whatever you're told. If you don't perform well, I'll beat you up. An illiterate father certainly hoped that his son could write and calculate, so that he would have a better future. But he was too vulgar to say any better words of encouragement, so he could only use his usual tone to scare the child. Patroclus, who often talked back, answered obediently today, "Got it, Dad." Just when Paliandolus was surprised, there was a knock on the door. "Who is it?" "It's me. It's Uncle Aguilas." Patroclus cheered and immediately rushed to open the door. Chapter 253. This era could not be compared to the future. The price of papyrus was still relatively expensive for civilians, and it was usually used for formal writing. Children often used sand to learn to write, so Patroclus prepared a wooden frame for storing sand. The waxed writing board could be stored for a long time, and it was easy to carry around. It was also cheap, but Patroclus's parents were reluctant to spend the money. As for the folding wooden chair, it was a masterpiece of the newly built Christoia school supplies store. It was cheap, and it was popular among the people as soon as it was introduced. It was much better than the simple wooden chair Patroclus's parents made themselves. Therefore, when Patroclus received Aguilas's gift, he jumped in excitement. "Village chief, this. Paliandrus, who had just fiercely reprimanded his son, looked grateful and a little timid in front of Aguilas, who was once a veteran and now had great prestige. He did not know what to say. "What is this?" Aguilas's eyes widened. Young Patroclus saved a few villages. This is the reward he deserves. I have high hopes for this child. He is brave, smart, and calm. When he can read and count, he will be better than you in the future. Hearing Aguilas's evaluation of his son, the father was so excited that he repeatedly agreed. The mother covered her face, and tears flowed down uncontrollably. She remembered the hard days she had spent with her husband all these years. Her husband worked as a porter at the port, and she and her child were hired to watch the stalls of the merchants in the market. Every day they were busy from morning to night. Not only did they have to endure the discrimination and difficulties of customers, but they also had to endure the extreme heat and cold. There were several times when they fainted from heatstroke, and they had to pay for lost goods. She really did not know how they survived those hard days. Fortunately, the city alliance of Dionia was established, and the great consul Devers took power. Poor foreign vagrants like them had the opportunity to become citizens of the city, own land, and live a stable and prosperous life. Therefore, she hoped that her child would not follow in her husband's footsteps. He wanted to learn well, and in the future, become a civil servant of the city, and live a decent life. After breakfast, Patroclus put his school supplies into a brand new linen bag, and his mother led him to the shrine at home. In the past, only the simple statues of the goddess of agriculture, Demeter, and the god of war, Ares, were worshipped here. One was to hope for a good harvest in the fields, and the other was to bless the husbands of the legions during the war to be safe and obtain military merits. It wasn't until the children had to go to school that the statue of Apollo, the god of the sun, was added, because this god was also in charge of literature and art. With his mother leading the way, Patroclus finished praying to Apollo. The mother gave her son 4 drachmas, which was for 1 school year. After her repeated reminders, Patroclus finally set off. At this time, the sky had just brightened and he could vaguely see the crescent moon on the horizon. Fortunately, it was summer and he was wearing a linen shirt with his calves bare. Otherwise, the dew on the weeds by the roadside would definitely wet his clothes. The cool and fresh morning breeze mixed with the smell of the earth and some herbs blew on Patroclus's body, making him feel relaxed and happy. Unable to suppress his excitement, he roared twice, and then he heard the sound of "gulp" coming from the ditch beside the dirt road. That was the sound of a frightened little fish making trouble. In the past, Patroclus would have taken off his leather sandals and jumped into the ditch to make a scene, but today, his mind had already flown to school. He carried his bag, a wooden chair and a wooden frame, humming an unknown tune as he strode forward. On the main road, there was a noticeable increase in the number of pedestrians. There were travelers in carriages, caravans loaded with goods, farmers carrying poles. Of course, there were also many parents who brought their children to school to register. The bustling crowd poured into the city of Thurii, the port, and the market. In the original plan of the Devers, the Dionia school should be built on the slope of the northern bank of the Tyro River to the west of the city of Thurii. It was surrounded by mountains and rivers, and there was a large wasteland, which was conducive to the further expansion of the school. In the future, the Dionia Academy would be built near the school, and it would be the largest education base of the Dionia Alliance. However, after discussing with Cunigurata and the others, the Devers temporarily cancelled this plan. After all, most of the students were children, and building the school on the northern bank of the Tyro River was not only a long distance, but also a little desolate. Not only would the children exhaust too much energy, but there was also no guarantee of safety. Therefore, the school was finally located in the delta in the middle of the confluence of the Kruti River and the Kosini River. It was not only part of the main city of Thurii, but it was also located in the middle of the Sabari Plain. It would be more convenient for the children of the citizens of Dionia to arrive at school on time. None of the senators objected because they knew that it was for the children of the citizens of Dionia, including their own children. Therefore, the construction efficiency was very high. In less than half a year, the walls, classrooms, school buildings, and a playground were built. It was impossible to make it beautiful in such a short time, but the playground for the children to play and train was large enough to accommodate all the parents and children who came to register today. Thousands of people crowded on the playground, and to prevent accidents, Ansatanos even called in the patrol team to maintain order. Patroklos stood in the middle of the procession, looking around. He realized that there were not many children like him who came to register alone, and there were also very few children his age. Therefore, when many curious eyes were cast on him, he felt a little uncomfortable. At this moment, there was a commotion in the line behind him, and the noise was getting louder and louder. The people around him all looked back, which made Patroklos very curious. "It's Lord Devers's wife, Christoia, and his daughter. Lord Devers is very young. How did his daughter get so old?" "That's his adopted daughter. It's said that she's the daughter of the former consul of Amendolara, Marcellus. Lord Devers's daughter?" Patroklos became even more curious as he listened to the discussions of the people around him. He squatted down and looked up through the gaps in the crowd. What he saw was a tall adult woman with an elegant temperament and a beautiful face. Just like the goddess of beauty, Aphrodite, in his imagination when he was young, she had an indescribable beauty. Beside her was a cute girl. Although she was a little shy in the face of the onlookers, she was also quietly and curiously looking around. When she noticed a pair of young eyes through the gap, she did not avoid it. Instead, she opened her bright eyes and looked at him. Patroklos quickly avoided her shyly. "Madam, please come to the front." Not only out of respect for the Devers, but also out of gratitude for Christoia. Because her bank helped many families, many people were willing to give up their seat. Christoia expressed her gratitude and politely declined. As the wife of the most powerful person in the Dionia Alliance, the intelligent Christoia always demanded herself as an ordinary citizen in public, not giving the Devers any reason to object. If it wasn't for the importance of today's registration, she would have asked Asuna to accompany her daughter. For this reason, she specially wore a simple dress and accompanied her daughter to school as inconspicuously as possible. In the end, it still caused some chaos. With great difficulty, order was restored and the registration continued. It was Patroklos's turn. Under the gaze of the staff, he said his and his parents' names and handed over the certificate issued by Agilas. According to the enrollment rules of Dionia, only children of official Dionia citizens could enroll. On the one hand, it was to reduce the pressure on the school and control the number of students. On the other hand, it was to let the foreigners and slaves working in Dionia know that only official Dionia citizens could enjoy these rights. This made the status of official Dionia citizens even more precious and motivated them to work harder to achieve this goal. Patroklos's parents were only preparatory citizens, so he was not eligible to enroll. However, Agilas applied to the Senate for his outstanding performance in the war. In view of the child's contribution in the war, the Senate finally made him an exception and gave him the green light. Therefore, Patroklos was actually the only student in the school whose parents were not official Dionia citizens. He did not know that he was special. After the staff found his name in the student register and confirmed his identity, he looked at him with interest. He took the tuition he had paid, ticked his name, and encouraged him. "You will study in classroom 1 from now on. Go and study hard, little fellow." Patroklos hurried out of the crowd and came to the edge of the field. There were rows of buildings here, each with a large wooden sign with Greek letters on it. Patroklos was dumbfounded because he couldn't read a word, so he had to ask someone else. "Hello, where is classroom 1? At this time, a clear voice came from behind. "Classroom 1 is right beside you, idiot." Patroklos hurriedly turned around and saw the daughter of Consul Dvers standing behind him. She was looking at him with her big bright eyes and a teasing smile on her round face. "Cynthia, it's very rude of you to say that. Apologize to this brother," Kristoya scolded her softly. Cynthia usually listened to Kristoya, but when faced with a boy who was only a few years older than her, she couldn't bring herself to say it. Her little face suddenly turned red, and she quickly turned her head away. Kristoya could only apologize to Patroklos in person. Chapter 254. Dionia's classroom was a cube with a height of 3.5 meters. It had a colonnaded structure. Other than the brick wall in the north, which was paved with cement and plaster to keep the wall smooth and painted black, the other 3 sides were transparent. The roof was supported by numerous stone pillars to ensure sufficient light, so it was an open building. Before Patroklos entered the classroom, he saw that there were already many children sitting inside. If Patroklos didn't want to sit outside the stone pillars and be exposed to the sun for a long time, he could only sit in the back row. He wasn't very willing. When he saw that all the students were boys, although the Senate had agreed to the proposal that girls could also study in the school, years of tradition still made it so that boys and girls couldn't be in the same classroom. His usual mischievous temperament began to show. He carried the folding wooden chair, squeezed straight forward, and shouted, "Move back! Make way for me!" Most of the boys in the classroom were only 7 or 8 years old, so the 13-year-old Patroklos seemed tall and strong. Everyone was afraid and had no choice but to move back, but a child stood up and accused Patroklos. The two refused to give in to each other, and because of the conflict of words, they developed into a fight. When the teacher arrived, he saw that Patroklos had thrown the boy to the ground. He hurried forward to stop them, and after asking about the cause of the fight, he immediately asked the culprit to stand outside the classroom. Patroklos refused to accept it. The teacher said sternly, "If you don't want to accept the punishment, then you don't have to come to school anymore." Although Patroklos was mischievous, he knew the severity of the situation, so he obediently walked out of the classroom. Who knew that the boy who was being beaten would take the opportunity to kick his butt, and the teacher was so angry that he shouted, "You also get out and stand outside." After dealing with the fight, the teacher placed a large hourglass on the wooden table, then sat on the wooden chair, took out the student roster, and said to the children sitting around him, "From today onwards, I will be the teacher in this classroom number 1 who will teach you how to read Greek. My name is Anatas. Hey, big guy, I'm Aminta's adopted son, Stephos. What's your name?" The grudges between the boys came and went quickly. Standing outside the classroom, the helpless boy couldn't help but ask his opponent. "Patroklos, son of Paliandrus," he replied casually. Then he thought of something and asked, "Your father is Amintas. Which Amintas?" "Of course it's the brave Amintas of the 1st Legion," Stephos said proudly. My father, Paliandrus, was a soldier under your father, Amyntas, Patroclus said in surprise. Because of this, the two boys became close. In the past 2 years, one of the consequences of Dionysius's military operations to unify the southeastern part of Sicily was that many people in the southeastern city-states of Sicily were forced to flee their homes. Most of them were attracted by the Dionia Immigration Act and chose to come to Thurii, which was not too far from Sicily. As the first place that the Greeks colonized in the western Mediterranean, Sicily was not only developed in agriculture and commerce, but also had a closer cultural exchange with the Greek mainland. Its cultural heritage was deeper than that of the city-states of the Italian peninsula. Therefore, some Sicilians successfully passed the test organized by Ansitanos and became teachers of the Dionia Union. Onatas was one of them. He chose to become a teacher of the newly established Dionia school. Although the salary was not as high as that of a private teacher, he could immediately become a citizen of Dionia and be given land. The school did not have a unified teaching material. The content and progress of the teaching were decided by the teachers themselves. However, the school required that after 3 years, students in primary education must be able to recognize and write at least 1,000 Greek words, read letters with accurate pronunciation, and write short and clear articles in fluent language so that the students could successfully pass the test and enter the secondary education. Every year, every teacher's teaching performance would be assessed. A teacher with poor performance for 3 consecutive years would be disqualified, which meant that he would be deprived of all the rights granted to teachers by the Dionia Union. Therefore, Onatas felt a sense of urgency. As a highly educated and cultured person, he could not allow himself to lose to other teachers. However, when he first learned his knowledge, his parents hired a teacher to teach him one-on-one. Now, he had to face more than 30 students in school. How could he ensure the effectiveness of his teaching? Onatas had thought about it carefully beforehand. As soon as he came in, he first punished the 2 children who were fighting. After taking roll call, he sternly emphasized the need to abide by the classroom's discipline. Students who violated the rules would be criticized and punished. In serious cases, they might even be expelled from school. As a result, the noisy classroom became quiet. Onatas was very satisfied with the result. He stood up and picked up a white pen from the wooden table. It was said that it was made by boiling limestone, mixing some animal fat and other substances, and then drying it in the sun. Onatas had tested it beforehand. The writing on the black wall was very clear. Even those standing at the back of the classroom could see it clearly. Facing more than 30 pairs of curious eyes, Onatas could not help but sigh in his heart. A new city-state alliance actually placed so much importance on the education of its citizens. Not only did they establish a teaching system that was unprecedented in the Greek city-states, but they also used various favorable conditions to attract high-quality foreigners to be teachers. Even the teaching supplies were carefully researched and produced. The children living in this alliance were so lucky. At this moment, he, who was already a citizen of Dionia, felt a sense of pride. He placed his left hand on the flat wall, and with his right hand, he wrote a string of letters on the wall. Before I teach you the Greek alphabet, I want you to recognize the word Dionia. It doesn't matter if you're a Greek or a Lucanian, you live in Dionia, grew up in Dionia, and will be a citizen of Dionia in the future. So, read it out loud with me, Dionia. Dionia. For most of the children of citizens of the city-state, under the guidance of their parents, they began to learn to read at the age of 6 or 7. Therefore, compared to his classmates who eagerly answered the questions, Patroclus's learning progress was much more difficult. However, when it came to arithmetic class, he showed a strong sensitivity to numbers. Even the teachers from the Institute of Mathematics paid attention to his performance. At noon, the class ended. Originally, the Greeks ate 2 meals a day in the morning and in the morning. Influenced by the Devers and military training, The citizens of Dionia had begun to get used to having 3 meals a day. Children living in Turiae could go home for meals. Those who lived far away, like Patroclus, had been informed by the school in advance and prepared some dry food for lunch at noon. Some children had their lunch bought by domestic slaves in the city. In the afternoon, it was mainly outdoor classes. Girls were taught dance and music, which was taught by the priests of the Temple of Hera. Boys were taught sports training, such as running, long jump, and some of the simplest military exercises, such as queuing, formation, marching as a whole, and so on. They were taught by disabled veterans, so that the children could cultivate a martial spirit from an early age. From an early age, they began to gradually understand and familiarize themselves with the formation changes and some basic tactics of the light and heavy infantry of Dionia. They also knew how to unite and cooperate. When they reached adulthood, they could easily integrate into the legion once they were recruited. In this regard, the Devers and the Senate learned some of the practices of Sparta. After the military training, the children's favorite was a ball game invented by the Archon Devers. Football, because it was not as intense and easy to get hurt as rugby. The children chased after each other and used their feet to control a near-circular ball that was sewn from cowhide and stuffed with inflatable tripe. They passed the ball to each other and passed it until the ball was kicked into the goal. The trees were too close to the road in our original design. After a long time, the roots would easily drill out of the road and damage the roadbed. This has happened many times on the Turiae and Mendola Avenue. Now, pedestrians, carts, and carriages are all on the avenue. During the day, when it is busy, the avenue is crowded with people and livestock. Not only is it easy to cause long-term traffic jams, but there have also been many accidents. My suggestion is to cut down the trees on both sides of the avenue and build a road for pedestrians outside the drainage ditch. This way, people and livestock can go their own way without interfering with each other, and the avenue will become smoother. The Devers read the Avenue Reconstruction Plan written by Heraclide Jr. while listening to his explanation. When he heard this, he could not help but be shocked. He had to admit that when he first built the avenue, there were some flaws in his design, such as the problem of the trees on the street, and he did not expect the rapid development of Dionia. After just over a year, the avenue that was 4 horses wide was not enough, but he did not expect Heraclide Jr. to think of paving the sidewalks so quickly. Of course, he knew that sidewalks were not a new thing that only appeared in the era of technology. In the middle and later period of the Republic of Rome, there was already a complete road system with avenues, sidewalks, drainage ditches, and other complete roads. He exhaled lightly and asked with a gentle expression, "Is there anything else that needs to be improved?" Chapter 255. That's great. Devers finally could not help but stand up excitedly. Young Heraclide, it's amazing that you can think of this. Sir, this is not my idea alone. It's a proposal after discussion with other staff of the Highway Bureau, young Heraclide said truthfully. Little Heraclide said honestly. He was a little confused. How could the young, wise, and seemingly God-given consul be so excited about some road reconstruction ideas? Of course, he would not understand that at this moment, Devers was thinking about the national characteristics of the Greek. Through the historical materials of his previous life and his personal experience in this era, he felt that the Greeks were indeed an excellent race. They had created a brilliant civilization in science, technology, culture, military, politics, sports, and so on. But why was it Rome and not Greece that later unified the Mediterranean? Dyphus believed that there were some fatal flaws in the Greek national characteristic. They were too self-centered and could not form unity. They were too passionate and unrestrained but lacked practical tenacity. The Greek city-states had built countless magnificent temples, arenas, and theaters, but they could not keep their cities clean and tidy. So, ever since Dyphus became the leader of the mercenary group, he had used strict military law to restrain the undisciplined mercenaries. He had been trying to slowly guide and change the Greek people under his rule. Young Heraclide's Highway Bureau could notice these details and make changes. This kind of serious, practical, and considerate approach certainly made Devers feel gratified. He praised, "My judgment was not wrong. You are not only an excellent road and bridge builder, but also a good road bureau chief, managing the road system in the Dionia Alliance." Young Heraclide was a little embarrassed in the face of praise, but he still continued to say, "The reconstruction of the road will cost a lot. I am worried that the Senate—" "Don't worry, the Senate will pass your proposal," Devers guaranteed. "The road has brought great benefits to Dionia. The reconstruction of the road will only make it more convenient for people to travel and transport goods. This is a good thing. It's worth it no matter how much it costs." "Then I'm relieved." Young Heraclide was sincerely grateful to Devers. It was this young man who stopped him and his father from wandering. It was also this young man who helped him find his own career. And it was this young man's support that made him stand out in the politics of Dionia. "How is your father's health?" The Devers words brought him back to his senses. "Not too good. Recently, he often wakes up at night and coughs nonstop. I can even see blood in his phlegm. I told him to rest more at home. Piascos is watching the temple, so there won't be any problems, but he just won't listen," Heracrid Jr. said worriedly. Devers sighed inwardly. In fact, Herpes, who had treated Heracrid, had already told him that this stubborn old man did not have much time left. Devers comforted him softly. "Your father sees the newly built city of Turin as his own child. He is worried about it. Don't worry, I'll ask Herpes to send a doctor to look after your father at all times." After sending young Heracrid Jr. away, Devers stretched and prepared to go back to the backyard to accompany his wife and son, who were sleeping soundly. At this time, the slave supervisor, Ribazat, came in and reported, "Master, Felicius, Bagul, Vespa, and Hemont, the 4 senators, are here to see you." Of course, Devers knew why these 4 people were here. This was a major event related to whether the arrangements of Dionia would finally be effective. He had to pull himself together and said, "Invite the 4 senators in." Speaking of which, Devers was a little helpless. The public officials of several cities in the Dionia Alliance, such as city governors, judges, tax officers, and so on, all had offices in the city hall. As for the senators who controlled the highest power in the alliance, they had no personal office except to discuss state affairs, discuss and enact bills in the Senate's Grand Hall. The same was true for the only senator in the alliance, the chief senator Devers. Therefore, the living room of his own mansion had become the usual office of the Devers, and most of the other senators were the same. The Senate had several times discussed building a magnificent office building for the senators of the entire alliance, but due to various factors such as funds and manpower, the proposal remained on paper. After the 4 of them took their seats, Felicius, the military officer, was the first to speak. "Master Devers, we are here to ask you if it is time to start the plan to seize the Grimentum." "What is the current situation of the Grimentum?" Devers asked with a serious expression. In fact, he had already learned about the situation in the Lucaria region through Aristyras. "Master Senator." Hemont bowed and said, "Not long after Potentia defeated Pichian and occupied the Grimentum, their great leader, Poimet, led the main army back to the city of Potentia, leaving only his brother, Borit, to lead 2,000 tribal warriors to guard the city of Grimentum. It turns out that Luzo, the son of the great leader of the Grimentum, Acapyrus, also stayed in the city to assist Borit in managing the Grimentum." Devers smiled. Luzo, who was betrayed by his own people? The people of Potentia really dared to use him? "Master, you are right. It was a mistake for Poimet to leave Luzo behind." Vespa took over the conversation and sneered. "I have dealt with Luzo before. He bullies the weak and fears the strong, and he is extremely vengeful. It was he who led the army to drive my tribe into the mountains. It is said that when he was in Potentia, he flattered Pwamut like a dog. Perhaps it was because of this that Pwamut mistakenly thought that he would help Potentia stabilize the governance of the Grimentum. However, after Luzo returned to the Grimentum and gained the support of several tribes, his strength increased, and he began to act arrogantly. Although the leaders of the tribes who had betrayed him had been killed by Sinsing, Luzo did not let his people off. He often sent new tribes to stir up trouble, and then punish them for disobedience. He took the opportunity to annex their settlements and pastures. He often agreed to Porot's orders verbally, but did not carry them out behind his back, and even went against him. The warriors from Potentia also bullied the people of the Grimentum in the city because they were the victors. It is said that Porot treated the tribes inside and outside the Grimentum city mildly, but he could not control his men, let alone make Luzo listen to his orders. Now, the people of Grimentum hate Luzo, hate the people of Potentia. As Wespa spoke, he glanced at Himeng. That's why the emissary that Himeng and I sent to the city secretly made contact with them, and we were warmly welcomed by them. They are eager for us to chase away the Bortians. The people of Grimentum hate Luzo, but we should thank him. The Devers joked and everyone laughed. The Devers asked again, what are their demands? They are willing to join Dionia, but they hope that after we take over the Grimentum, we will allow them to move to Nudum and give them land no smaller than their current settlements and pastures. Like the tribes in Nudum, Dionia will not interfere with their management of the people. For this, they are willing to provide the greatest help for Dionia to take over the city of Grimentum. After listening to Hemont, the Devers was slightly surprised. Their demands are that simple. At first, their demands were far more than that, but our people made them realize that they have betrayed Luzo and Sinsing. Now, they want to drive away the people of Potentia, so their only hope is the alliance of Dionia. Making things difficult for the master who will protect them in the future is not a smart thing to do. Hemont said with some pride. The peaceful life of the Lucanians in Dionia and the good reputation of the alliance of keeping its promises made them finally choose to cooperate with us. If that's the case, why didn't they stay in the Grimentum after we took over the Grimentum? After all, that is their homeland. The Devers was a little confused. Sir, that's because they are afraid. Bagul said disdainfully. Because they think that Potentia and Picassus will come again to fight for the Grimentum city in the future. They don't dare to face their wrath again. These guys are smart people, the Devers muttered. To be honest, he was worried about leaving these capricious tribes in the Grimentum. Since they were smart enough to leave voluntarily, of course, the Devers would return the favor. Is there any spare pastures in Nudum to accommodate them? Not at the moment, Vespa said hesitantly. However, I have negotiated with all the tribal leaders in Nudum. Some of the tribes are willing to move to the Grimentum and exchange with these Grimentum tribes settlements, but they want to be compensated with the mining rights of the Grimentum's iron mines. The Devers shook his head gently. The iron mines of the Grimentum had long been coveted by some of the senators in the Senate. Senators like Masasaku's had looked for him several times, hoping to contract the iron mines of the Grimentum. He pondered for a moment and said, "It's impossible to have the mining rights, but they can get a part of the profits from the iron mines. As for the specific amount, Hemont, you go and negotiate with them, but it can't exceed 20%, provided that they provide manpower to participate in the mining and transportation." "Okay, I will go to Nudum tomorrow to discuss with them." Hemont nodded. Chapter 256. Hearing that, Bagul stood up and walked to the map prepared by the Devers. He pointed at the narrow path between the Are River and the upper reaches of the Sini River and said, "The people of Picassus once built a camp here, mainly to guard against us. After the people of Potentia occupied the Grimentum, they did not give up on it. Instead, they fortified it. According to the report from the reconnaissance team, There are about 200 warriors of Potentia guarding the camp. Although there are not many of them, the narrow path is not conducive for the deployment of troops. It is impossible for us to take it in a short period of time. Instead, it will alert the people of Potentia in the Grimentum. If they come to reinforce us quickly, it will be a big problem for us. After careful consideration, Master Sesta and I have decided not to take the narrow path. Instead, we will follow your previous suggestion and cross the Ra River directly to the north bank. We will march from the mountain path in the south and attack the Grimentum. Although the Ra River is not wide, there are steep cliffs on both sides. Even the people of Lucania, who are good at climbing, will have to spend a lot of effort to climb over. How are you going to cross the river with thousands of people? Hemant questioned. Bagul looked at the Devers. The Devers smiled and nodded. So, Bagul said, Master Devers asked little Heracrid to send his men to follow us for a few days. They carefully surveyed both sides of the Ra River. They believe that they have the ability to build a rope bridge on both sides in 1 or 2 days. It will not be a problem for them to cross 6,000 warriors. Now, the materials for building the bridge, such as the ropes and wooden planks, have been made. We are just waiting for your order, Master Devers. Hemant and Vespa looked at each other. They had not heard anything about this matter. They had been thinking of ways to mobilize and plan the tribes outside the Grimentum to attack the camp guarding the narrow path, opening up a path for the attacking troop. The Devers saw that their expressions were not right, so he quickly said with a solemn expression, according to the military law of Dionia, military plans must be kept confidential. If they are leaked, they will be punished, and the more serious ones will even be executed. But because you are participants in this operation, Bagul has told you the military operation plan. I hope you can keep it a secret when you go back and don't leak it out. When Vespa and Hemant heard this, the unhappiness in their hearts dissipated and they immediately made a promise. It will take more than a day to travel from Nudum to the Grimentum. No matter how well hidden an army of 6,000 people is, they will be easily discovered, Felicius reminded. Before Bagul could reply, Hemant said, If Bagul leads the troops to cross the river and take the mountain path in the south, there is no need to worry. Hemant pointed at the Ra River on the map and said confidently, Because of our efforts, the tribes in the southern settlements outside the Grimentum are basically willing to follow Dionia. When the time comes, I will follow Bagul's troops. I believe that the tribes there will not leak our whereabouts, and they will help us reach the Grimentum faster. If Master Hemant can go, it will be the greatest help to attack the Grimentum. The Devers smiled and expressed his welcome. At the same time, he said, to prevent any accidents, I will send Izam's scouting team to infiltrate the Grimentum area and try to block the mountain paths leading to the city from the south. They will intercept the Lucanians who may report back to the city. This will ensure that when you launch a surprise attack on the Grimentum city, the enemy will not know about it. The few tribes in the city have promised us that as long as we launch the attack, they will gather about 500 tribesmen and attack the southern gate guarded by Luzo. Hemant seemed even more excited after receiving the Devers' praise. With the joint efforts of the few sirs, we are well prepared for this operation. The Devers spread his hands and smiled relaxedly. He looked at Bagul and said earnestly, Bagul, you are the frontline commander. The specific battle deployment and cooperation with the allies in the city are up to you. I will not interfere from far away in Turii. I just hope that you will think about the difficulties as much as possible. If there is an accident, you must have the corresponding measures. Bagul nodded solemnly. He felt the pressure. Vespa, who was sitting next to him, patted him on the shoulder and gave him encouragement. There was excitement and envy in Hemant's eyes. This was the first time that the Lucanians led an army independently in the Dionia alliance. Bagul had a bright future. It was a pity that he was married. Otherwise, Hemant would have married one of his daughters to him. Do you have any other requests? the Devers asked again. Bagul hesitated for a moment and said, I have taken all the warriors in Nudum with me. The defense there is a little weak. I hope that some soldiers from Turai can be sent to temporarily protect the safety of Nudum. The Devers were still considering it. Felicius immediately said, Sir, I think we can let Xantiparis and the others go to Nudum to guard it, and these mercenaries who came back from Persia with me have rich experience in fighting in the mountains. The Devers only remembered that there was an elite force in Turai who did not have to farm and did odd jobs at the port. They can also help you seize the Grimentum. With their help, I am more confident in seizing the Grimentum, Bagul said excitedly. The Devers stood up and looked around at the four of them. Tomorrow I will propose to the Senate that we attack the Grimentum. I hope that you will work together and bring news of victory as soon as possible. After more than 2 days of trekking, the 1,000 mercenaries led by Xantiparis finally walked out of the mountains and arrived at Rahi Fortress. For the sake of confidentiality, Rahi Fortress had sealed off the passage to the north. It was announced that there was a group of Lucanians who had escaped from the Grimentum and were hiding in the mountains. They had repeatedly robbed the people and merchants of Nudum, and Nudum had sent out troops to search for them. Therefore, there were few pedestrians on the road to Nudum, and no merchants who usually came and went to trade could be seen. Now that we're here, we can finally see the flat road. The rest of the journey should be easier. Tormid complained. I heard that the road from Nudum to Turai has been under construction for more than a year, and it's still only this far. After all, this is a mountainous area, not a road on flat land. It's not like you don't know how difficult the mountain road we just passed through was. The Devers actually wanted to make it a flat road. If it were me, I wouldn't even dare to think about it. It's normal for the road to be built slowly here, as long as it can be fixed in the end. Xantiparis comforted him. Xantiparis, you've only been in Dionia for half a year, and you're already speaking up for the Devers. Tormid teased. Xantiparis glanced at him. Aren't you? The two laughed. I hope this expedition goes well, and we can all become citizens of Dionia, Tormid said expectantly. Previously, when they followed the First Legion to Caronia, Rockley sued for peace without fighting, causing the mercenaries' attempt to gain credit to fall through. I'm not worried about that. I'm worried that our brothers will change their weapons and equipment. Will it affect their battle and increase the casualties? Xantiparis said worriedly as he looked back at the bare-chested, sweaty soldiers. Because they had to march and fight in the mountains, the Devers suggested that Xantiparis let the mercenaries not wear Corinth helmets, thick and airtight linen breastplates, bronze gauntlets, and heavy round shields for the time being. Instead, they should change into the Lucanian warrior's attire, a leather hat, a short robe, and a wooden shield. During the battle with the Lucaria tribal alliance and the battle to capture Nudum, Dionia seized a large number of Lucanian weapons and equipment and threw them into the Turias arsenal. No one had used them. Xantiparis, who had experience fighting in the mountains, finally accepted the Devers' suggestion after careful consideration. Don't worry. Our attacking force is much greater than the enemy's. Besides, we have spies. It won't be a problem to take Nudum. Also, our brothers have changed into the Lucanian equipment, so the march will be much easier. Otherwise, just climbing a mountain would be enough to tire us out. But here, Tormid pointed to the flat but ever-increasing terrain in front of them and said, We've been climbing the mountain all this time. Xantiparis knew that Tormid was right. He was just old and not used to this new change, so he remained silent. Tormid leaned close to him and whispered, Recently, I heard from Agathia that the Devers, Felicius, and the 3 legion commanders have had several discussions. They are preparing to modify the weapons and equipment of the Dionia soldiers to make them lighter and more suitable for long-term long-distance and mountainous operations. Xantiparis was stunned and said with slight worry, Is this news true? If they don't have bronze shields and heavy armor, are they still the Greek heavy infantry? Xantiparis, Don't forget that the Greek heavy infantry still used bronze breastplates a few decades ago. It was because it was too heavy and not conducive to combat that they finally changed to the current linen breastplates. Tormid reminded him, "This is not the point you should be concerned about. What you should consider is why the Devers want to improve the soldiers' equipment." Chapter 257. Thinking of the Devers' possible strategic plans in the future, Xanthoparis took a deep breath. "Tormid, it looks like I won't be able to leave the battlefield for the rest of my life. At least you don't have to worry about not having the chance to be a commander, or even a senator in the Senate," Tormid said excitedly. Grimentum was a mountain city. Unlike the hill occupied by Amendolara, which was less than 200 meters high, the hill occupied by Grimentum was about 300 meters high. At first, the wooden walls of Grimentum were built at the foot of the hill. Later, during Acapiru's tenure as chief, the city expanded on a large scale, annexing and incorporating the surrounding small tribes and moving into Grimentum. But because it could not accommodate them, the city had to expand outwards, doubling the area of Grimentum. The entire city was divided into 3 parts. Most of the outer city was inhabited by the newly incorporated tribes, the inner city was inhabited by the tribes that originally belonged to Grimentum, and the core area was the hilltop, also built with wooden walls, where the chief's tribe lived. At the peak of Grimentum, there were nearly 30,000 residents in the city. However, after the Devers' mercenary army defeated the Lucaria tribe's allied forces and Acapiru was seriously injured, Luzo lacked prestige and found it difficult to unify the tribes of Grimentum. And because of the outbreak of war with Picassus, some tribes in Grimentum's territory began to flee. When Sinsing seized Grimentum, in order to control the entire city, he used a scheme to kill the leaders of the tribes in the city and those who disobeyed him. This caused the people to feel insecure and divided. There were constantly people from the city who quietly fled the city, so the population of the city was greatly reduced, and the number of people was not enough to defend the city. So after Potentia declared war, Sinsing moved all the residents into the inner city and burned the outer walls and houses. After Potentia became the new master of Grimentum, they did not rebuild the outer city. At this time, the inner city had 3 gates. The east, west, and south, and the north was a cliff. Borat's initial deployment was to send 500 Potentia warriors to each of the 3 city gates. Behind them would be the scattered tribes of the original Grimentum, and above them would be the tribes of Luzo. Not only would they act as a reserve force in the event of a war, they would also monitor the movements of these tribes. Once there were signs of a riot, they would attack from above and below, easily quelling the war. Meanwhile, the core region at the top of the mountain would be commanded by Borat, leading 500 elite Potentia warriors. However, not long after this deployment was implemented, it was destroyed, and the saboteur was Luzo. After his strength increased, he no longer wanted to listen to Borat's orders, especially after he had suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of Sinsing and was almost trapped in the city and captured alive. Therefore, he strongly requested to guard a city gate area. In the end, Borat was forced to station Luzo at the south gate. Moreover, because of Luzo's oppression of the people in the city, the tribes in the city were unwilling to live in the south city area. Instead, they were more concentrated in the East Gate area. Borat was actually very clear about the current situation in the city, and he was deeply uneasy. However, his prestige and strength were not enough to deter the increasingly arrogant Luzo. At the same time, because of Luzo's reckless behavior, the people of Potentia were also dissatisfied. They followed suit, causing him to gradually lose control of this group of warriors from the various tribes of Potentia. The anger of the people in Grimentum grew day by day. Borat felt as if he was sitting on the crater of a volcano. This sense of crisis made him finally decide to send someone back to Potentia to complain to his elder brother, Pwamath, about his current predicament. He also requested that Luzo be transferred away, and at the same time, more potential warriors be sent to stabilize the situation in Grimentum. After finally making this decision, Borit seemed to be much more relaxed. These 2 days, he actively patrolled the entire city, and even reprimanded the leader for the careless security at the East Gate. On this day, it was almost dusk when Borit returned to his residence at the top of the mountain. He felt hungry, so he asked the guards to roast a leg of lamb and brought over a pot of wine, ready to eat and drink at the same time. At this moment, he could vaguely hear the sounds of fighting coming from the bottom of the mountain. After all, this mountain city was a few hundred meters high. To be able to hear the sounds from the top of the mountain, it was obvious that the commotion was not small. Borit's expression changed. He immediately ran out of his residence and met the sentinel who had rushed over to report the news. "Chief, there's an enemy attacking the city. The people of Grimentum in the city have attacked our warriors." "What?" The sentinel's words were like a bolt from the blue, causing Borit to turn pale with fright. Dusk was the time for the warriors to eat. The people of Potentia ate cheese, beef, and mutton while venting their dissatisfaction with Chief Borit. Borit had tormented them for the past 2 days. When they were full and in a good mood, the bugle suddenly sounded. When the leaders and officers of all clans anxiously drove the warriors out of the camps, many of them still couldn't believe that the war had suddenly come without any sign. They hurriedly picked up their weapons and reorganized their rank. However, the enemy's attack was very swift. Just as they rushed out of the dense forest and exposed themselves to the sentinels in the city, they quickly approached the east, west, and south sides of Grimentum. The sentinel on the wooden wall of the east gate watched helplessly as the enemies, limited by the uneven hills, dense wooden fences, and dear abatis, were forced to gather into a few narrow mountain paths that led to each gate. If a large number of arrows and javelins were thrown, the densely packed enemies would definitely suffer serious casualties. However, there were only a few dozen arrows that landed in the midst of the enemy's formation. They could not even cause a ripple. "Hurry! Hurry! Hurry! The enemy is closing in!" The warrior on top of the city wall anxiously turned around to urge his teammates, who were still dawdling at the foot of the city wall. Suddenly, his voice stopped abruptly. Above the Potentia camp, a team of a few hundred people, armed with spears, lined up in a column, rushed down. It was the reinforcements sent by the people of Grimentum. The warrior on top of the city wall felt a little relieved, but what happened next left him dumbfounded. This team crashed straight into the rear of the Potentia soldiers, who were hurriedly preparing to go up the city wall. They shouted, "Go to hell! Damn Potentia pigs!" They stabbed the spears in their hands at the bewildered warriors of Potentia. Screams and shouts of killing filled the air. The city was in a mess. Taking advantage of the chaos in the city, the enemies outside the city had already arrived at the foot of the city wall. They threw the sacks filled with soil on their backs into the trench and quickly filled up a path. Then, they rushed to the wooden wall and built long ladders. The warriors of Potentia resisted tenaciously, but most of them were fighting fiercely with the tribal warriors of Grimentum inside the city. There were not many warriors on the city wall, but the enemy did not care about their lives and continued to attack fiercely. Not long after, the enemy charged up the city wall. From the lookout at the top of the mountain, Borit saw the enemies constantly pouring in from the eastern city wall at the foot of the mountain. The line of defense was in imminent danger. He was extremely anxious. "Take my wolf Fong and immediately tell Luzo that the eastern gate is in danger. Ask him to send some warriors to help defend the eastern gate. Otherwise, if the enemy charges into the city, no one will be able to escape." "Yes, Chief." The guard received the token with a nervous expression. Watching the guard rush down the mountain, Borit was still worried. He sent someone to order the 500 warriors of Potentia stationed on the mountainside to rush to the eastern gate. After giving the order, Borit took a breather and had time to calm down and think. Where did the enemy come from? Were they Picassus's men? Could they still send such a large number of warriors after just suffering a great defeat? Were they from Dionia? When he thought of the powerful Greek city-state alliance in the south, Borit felt his breath tighten. Even though Potentia was not adjacent to Dionia, they had felt pressure from the south from time to time over the past year. It was not only because of their strength, but more importantly, the Lucanians did not reject this alliance that was dominated by Greek. That was the most terrifying thing. This terrifying situation made it impossible for the Lucanians to unite and fight against this outsider. This was also why the steady Poimet had finally made up his mind to take down Grimentum. Only by strengthening themselves could they contend with this force that was expanding at an alarming rate. Therefore, when Poimet left, he repeatedly reminded Borit to pay attention to the movements of the Dionia alliance. Of course, Borit attached great importance to it. He sent 200 warriors from his tribe to guard the pass and sent scouts south to monitor Nutum's movements. However, Nutum was heavily guarded, with many checkpoints set up to block the northern passage, so the scouts returned without success. Now there was no abnormal news from the camp guarding the pass, and the enemies attacking the city were all dressed in Lucanian attire. This made Borit's suspicion stop on Dionia for a while before he moved on to the last suspect, Galagusso. As a group of tribes that upheld the most ancient traditions in Lucania municipality, they preferred to live in the mountains rather than on flat land. They were far away from the center of Lucania municipality and built the city of Galagusso in the mountains in the northeast. For decades, they rarely participated in the disputes between other tribes and refused to ally with other tribes. They only allied with a few Lucanian tribes. When Asopyrus unified southern Lucania, he did not have any intentions of attacking it. Could it be that the conservative Galagusso had changed their tradition this time? At this time, the eastern city wall had been occupied by the Dionia soldiers. They did not rest and continued to advance into the city. At the forefront were the 500 mercenaries led by Xanthoparus. Another 500 mercenaries were led by Tormid to guard Nutum. Chapter 258. A portion of the mercenaries at the east gate, armed with spears and shields, rushed down the wooden wall to attack the potential warriors in the city to support the Grimentum, who were on the verge of collapse. The rest of the mercenaries ran to the top of the gate and turned the locked winch. The east gate was opened and the soldiers at the back swarmed in. The Potentia soldiers defending the east gate were attacked from both the front and back, and were struggling to hold on. When Loiseau received Paulet's order, he was shocked. He did not expect the tribes in Grimentum to rebel again. His first reaction was not to worry about the situation at the east gate, but to fear that something would happen to the soldiers under his command. More than half of the more than 1,000 soldiers were tribal warriors who had pledged allegiance to him after entering the city. In addition, the enemy at the south gate was attacking fiercely. He did not dare to disperse his forces, so he refused to send reinforcements. However, the potential warriors stationed on the mountainside immediately went down the mountain to provide reinforcements when they received the order. When they arrived, their companions at the east gate were in a difficult situation. The leader of the team did not hesitate and took the lead to kill the enemy. The reinforcements from Potentia complicated the situation in the east. The mercenaries and the warriors of the Grimentum tribes attacked the soldiers at the east gate from the front and back, while the warriors of the Grimentum were attacked from the front and back by the people of Potentia. The four forces fought each other in the city and in the narrow area in front of the entrance to the mountain road. The first to react was Xanthoparus. Thanks to the Dionia military law, Xanthoparus had been instructed many times during this period of training to not fight on the front lines unless it was a special situation. Therefore, in this siege, he followed from the rear. Faced with such a chaotic situation, he, who had rich battlefield experience, quickly made a decision. He ordered the mercenaries to slowly retreat to the city wall, and at the same time, informed Kelsima to lead his soldiers to go around the houses on both sides and surround the enemy. The retreat of the mercenaries gave the potential warriors a glimmer of hope. They believed that the enemy could not hold on any longer, so their morale was greatly boosted. On the other hand, the Grimentum people felt despair. They were originally a motley crew, and their fighting spirit had almost collapsed. However, as the potential warriors advanced, they gradually surrounded them from all sides. Unable to escape, they had no choice but to fight desperately for their survival. However, Polet, who was at the top of the hill, was terrified. He saw that the enemies were retreating in an orderly formation, while the enemies who were rushing into the city gates circled around the houses on both sides, gradually forming a large encirclement around the Portentia garrison and reinforcements, as well as the Grimentums. Some of the enemies were standing on top of the city walls, holding javelins in their hands. From such a high vantage point and such a close distance, it was almost certain that every javelin would hit its target. Polet closed his eyes in pain. Now, he was certain that the enemy was from the terrifying Dionia alliance. The Lucanian warriors were full of fighting spirit, but their formation had always been loose. They were not as organized and tight as this one. Polet scolded Luzo for disobeying orders while hesitating on whether to send the last of his troops to this hopeless eastern battlefield. The deadly rain of javelins and the ferocious attacks of the mercenaries finally led to the defeat of the garrison at the east gate. The encirclement shrank like a noose around the neck of the potential reinforcements. Feeling hopeless, they finally chose to surrender. In the end, Polet, who was worried about his gains and losses, did not send out his remaining 500 warriors. Instead, he defended the top of the mountain. Following that, Xanthoparis and Sima led their troops to attack the south. Luzo, who was already struggling to hold on, was no match for them. As they retreated to the west, they were killed by the Grimentum warriors who had lost control. When it was dark, the Dionysian army defeated the defenders in the east, west, and south. The entire army entered the Grimentum city, leaving only the 500 warriors led by Polet at the top of the mountain. They were terrified when the army approached. At this moment, Hemont raised his torch and went up the mountain alone, ready to persuade Polet to surrender. In order to save the lives of his people, Polet finally agreed to surrender. The warriors had no choice but to put down their weapons, open the mountain gate, and follow Hemont down the mountain empty-handed. Polet said to Hemont resentfully, "You helped the Greeks kill their own people and seize their land. Aren't you afraid of the wrath of the god Asanu?" Hemont turned around and said meaningfully, "You're wrong. I'm not helping the Greeks, but the Lucanians. The god Asanu will only be happy about this." With 600 casualties, Dionia seized the Grimentum. Luzo and its henchmen were all slaughtered. A few days later, Potentia and Dionia signed a truce agreement. More than 1,000 captured Potentia warriors were safely sent back to the city of Potentia. Unlike the fall of Nudum, the news of the change in ownership of the Grimentum quickly spread throughout the Lucaria region. It caused great waves among many small tribes and even many factions. But Dionia did not take further military action. Instead, they followed the plan that had been drawn up in advance and carried it out step by step. Bagul was appointed as the city's governor of the Grimentum, Hemont was appointed as the city's intermediate judge, Assists was transferred to the Grimentum as an intermediate inspector, and Sima was appointed as the captain of the patrol team. The first thing that Bagul did when he took office was to take over the camp along the passageway between Nudum and the Grimentum. Next, only 2,000 warriors were left in the Grimentum. The remaining 3,000 warriors and the mercenaries led by Xanthoparis returned to their own cities, Nudum, Turiae and Aspirutum, to reduce the pressure on the army's food supply. Several tribes in the city of Grimentum also went south with them. The next thing to do was to fulfill the promise that Vespa and Hemont had made to the small tribes around the Grimentum. They were to accept them into the Dionia alliance, divide their settlements and pastures, and abolish the many exploits that the Grimentum and Potentia had done to them. When Sinsing learned that the Dionia alliance had taken over the Grimentum, he cursed them for being sinister and cunning. However, on the surface, the heavily injured Picassus had to send an emissary to Thurii to express their goodwill and peace. Even Galagusso, who rarely participated in the disputes of the Lucanian tribes, sent an emissary to find out the intentions of their powerful new neighbor. Because of the captives, Potentia was forced to sign a truce agreement with Dionia. However, as the dominant Lucanian tribal alliance in the north of Lucania, Dionia's surprise attack hurt their dignity and angered the tribal leaders of Potentia. However, they were suppressed by the steady leader, Plomoth, who chose to endure. The strong Greek aura of the Dionia alliance was so unique in Lucania that it immediately attracted the attention of another Greek city-state in the area, Aelia. Aelia was also one of the many Greek colonial cities that were built on the Italian peninsula during the Greek Great Colonization era. It was a few decades later than Cumae, which was the first city to be built. 3 neighboring coastal cities, Aelia, Picassus, and Poseidonia, were built one after another. Compared to the other 2 cities, Aelia, which was sandwiched in the middle, was a little unknown. During the process of the Lucanians' migration to the south 100 years ago, Poseidonia and Picassus fell one after another. Aelia, which was slightly weaker, managed to survive. However, Aelia, which was surrounded by the Lucanians, was in danger of being destroyed at any time. If it wasn't for the conflicts between the tribes of Lucania, such as Potentia and Picassus, and Potentia and Grimentum, which made Aelia a buffer zone, the Lucanians would not attack it with all their might. But for the past few decades, Aelia's life had not been easy. Parts of the land outside the city were occupied by foreign tribes, and they were attacked from time to time. It was extremely dangerous for the people to leave the city, and they could easily be captured by the Lucanians and turned into slaves. Therefore, the people of Aelia relied on the production and processing of handicrafts, as well as the development of maritime trade, cargo transshipment, port services, to barely maintain the operation of the city and the lives of the people. Now that Dionia appeared, the people of Aelia saw the light of hope. Therefore, after a discussion, all the citizens decided to send an envoy to Dionia, the new Greek city-state alliance, to express their willingness to form an alliance. Khanios, a member of the council, gladly accepted this glorious mission. However, it was obviously impossible to go to Dionia by land. Potentia and Picassus would not allow him to pass through their land, so he could only go by sea. The passenger ship did not need to go around the Strait of Messina, because the people of Aelia knew that Laos was an ally of Dionia. The passenger ship carrying Khanios, with the strong south wind, sped south like an arrow. Khanios stood at the bow of the ship, thinking about the mission. His Etruscan slave, Ino, pointed to the east and suddenly shouted, "Picassus!" Khanios looked up. In his vision, the distant land in the east was nothing but a small green strip, dotted with a small white dot. That was Picassus. It was once the sister city of Aelia, but now it had become the nest of the foreign tribes, the nightmare of Aelia. While Khanios mourned for the people of Picassus, he also secretly made up his mind, "I will not let Aelia repeat the same mistake." Because the wind was right, the ship sailed for 2 hours and arrived at Laos. Khanios had been to Laos before, so he knew the situation of the port better. Although Laos was occupied by the Lucanians at that time, it did not prohibit trade with the Greek. It was just that the Lucanians' habit of looting and discrimination between races made their reputation not too good, so there was not much direct trade between the Greeks and Laos. Chapter 259. It had only been a year since Laos joined Dionia, but the port had changed so much that Khanios was shocked. He had to wait for a while before there was a free dock for him to dock at. The officials sent by the City Hall of Laos were already waiting at the dock. Khanios gladly accepted the officials' invitation and went to meet the lord of the city, Governor Avenogis. "Is this port always so busy?" Khanios asked in the crowded crowd. "Yes," the official said proudly, The merchants of Dionia like to rent ships here to trade with Gaul in the north or the Iberian Peninsula in the west. They will then come ashore here with their goods and transport them back to Thurii. A few months ago, after the establishment of the Southern Alliance, we became even busier here. Merchant ships from Trine, Corunna, Crotone, and Silatina also come to Laos from time to time. As long as it is a member of the Dionia Alliance, we, Laos, will provide the best service and discount for the ship's anchorage, accommodation, and food supply. Now, after Grimentum became a member of the Dionia Alliance, there are more merchants coming here. Most of them are here for the fine iron ore of Grimentum. Laos welcomes the merchants of Elia to trade here. Kanos smiled and was about to reply when an angry voice came from the front. "Damn idiots, don't block the way." Then there was a scream. Kanos saw two naked men lying on the side of the road in front of him. Their bodies were covered with bloody whip marks, and a few heavy sacks were lying on the side. "These slaves are Lucanians." To avoid leaving a bad impression, the official quickly explained, "Their ancestors took over Laos by force and turned the Greeks of Laos into slaves, making us live a life worse than death for generations. Now, Lord Avanogus has led us to take back Laos. A year ago, they were still the masters of this city, ordering us around like cattle and sheep. Now we, the Greeks, have become the masters of Laos again. Let them have a taste of being slaves." Kanos looked at the emotional official and thought, "You don't look like a pure Greek at all. You turned the Lucanians of this city into slaves?" he asked. "Not all. Some of them were relatives of the Lucanians of the Dionia Alliance, but they were later released by Lord Avanogus and went to Nudum. I guess they are now citizens of Dionia. I don't know why the Dionians are so tolerant of these barbarians who believe in foreign gods." The official mumbled softly. Although he was resentful, he did not vent it out as loudly as before. Kanos's heart skipped a beat. This showed the influence of Dionia on the people of its affiliated city-state. The city of Laos, located near the estuary of the La River, was not too big, with a population of less than 5,000. It was mainly composed of two parts. One was the tribe that the Avanogus family had always led. This was also the core force of his lifelong Council of Laos, so after these tribesmen were converted into citizens, Avanogus gave them land. The other part was the original Greek slaves. Avanogus liberated them and gave them citizenship, but they did not have land. In order to make a living, they worked as low-level officials in the city, or as employees and dock laborers. Fortunately, the tax burden of Laos was not too heavy. As long as they were diligent and willing to work, they should have some savings. Although Avanogus claimed to be a descendant of Greeks, he always knew in his heart that he and most of the citizens of this city were mixed race, so the citizens of Laos had a similar sense of inferiority, exclusion, and ethnic identity. Moreover, he rescued them from slavery. As long as he treated the people well, then they would support him. So even though he learned from the Devers and appointed himself as a lifelong consul, in fact, the Council of Laos was just for show. There was no General Assembly, and all matters, big or small, were decided by Avanogus. He was the real tyrant. Kanios met Avanogus in the so-called City Hall, which was actually the mansion of the Castellan. The burly, fat, and slightly ferocious-looking consul of Laos had even prepared a banquet. He warmly welcomed Kanios and invited him to take a seat. This put Kanios, who was a little on guard, at ease. After he took his seat, he also raised his wine glass and expressed his sincere gratitude to Avanogus for his hospitality. He then said, 3 years ago, I came to Laos, but this time, I found that Laos has changed a lot, especially the port trade is very prosperous. Laos has only been free for a little more than a year, and he has already achieved such great achievements. You must have put in a lot of effort for this, Lord Consul. Kanios' compliments made Avanogus very comfortable. He laughed and said, Of course I have put in a lot of effort, but I should be more grateful to the allies of Laos. In this alliance, Laos has enjoyed a lot of convenience. Canios listened with a thoughtful expression on his face. At this time, Avenogis asked, "Did Elia send you this time to join the Dionia alliance?" Canios was stunned. With Elia's situation and his visit to Dionia at this time, anyone with a discerning eye could roughly guess the purpose of their visit. But Canios did not expect Avenogis to ask so directly. He put down the wine glass in his hand, thought for a moment, and said vaguely, "Whether to join the alliance or adopt other forms of alliance depends on the results of the discussion with Dionia." Avenogis looked at him and grinned. "Please forgive me for being direct. Based on my understanding of Dionia, with Elia's current strength, I'm afraid Dionia will not accept other forms of alliance." This was obviously saying that Elia was not strong enough, so he should not dream of getting better treatment in the talks with Dionia. Canios was a little embarrassed. He lowered his head and drank without saying a word. Avenogis then said, "I heard that Elia has close contacts with the Greek city-states of Campania. If Elia has any kind of alliance with them, I'm afraid Dionia will not necessarily accept Elia into the alliance because it does not allow the city-states of the alliance to have any diplomatic relations with other city-states." Canios was a little surprised. He did not know that there was such a rule between Dionia and the alliance. "Thank you for the reminder, Lord Consul. The city-states of Campania did give some help to Elia, but Elia did not have an alliance agreement with any city-state," Canios answered without hesitation. In fact, the Campania alliance, led by Naples and Capua, had never agreed to accept Elia. This was because Campania and Lucania, two powerful races, were between Campania and Elia. Elia was not strong. Once Elia became an alliance, only Campania would continue to help Elia, but it would be difficult for Elia to contribute much to the Campania alliance. The Greeks, who had always been smart, would not make such a losing deal. Elia could trade with Campania, but both sides had mutual needs. To recruit mercenaries from Campania to defend against the Lucanians, they had to pay. "That's great. Let Elia join the Dionia alliance. With Dionia's reputation and strength, the Lucanians will no longer be a problem for you. Furthermore, Elia and Laos, as the only two port cities on the Tyrrhenian Sea in the Dionia alliance, can cooperate with each other in the future and strengthen trade." Avenogis smiled excitedly, as if he had no ulterior motives when he made his suggestion. Canios was silent for a moment. How could he express his opinion without meeting the person in question? So, he changed the topic. "Lord Consul, you must have met the Consul Devers of the Dionia alliance, right? What kind of person is he?" "I've met him many times. I've even fought alongside him." Avenogis looked proud. He wiped the wine stains from his mouth and said solemnly, "I'll give you a piece of advice. Don't underestimate him just because he's young. He's a great man." Since Elia had to deal with Dionia, he had naturally done some research on Dionia. Naturally, the focus of his investigation was the Devers. The members of Elia's council had different opinions about him. They admired his outstanding ability. The rise of Dionia in such a short time was definitely inseparable from his hard work. They were uneasy about his identity as the only lifelong consul. How was this different from the tyrant Dionysius of Syracuse? Would Elia's cooperation with Dionia be inviting a wolf into the house? Canios needed to judge based on what he saw and heard. The prosperity of Laos reduced his worries, while Avenogis' words increased his curiosity. Was this the admiration of the tyrant towards the tyrant? "By the way, I can send you to Thurii tomorrow," Avenogis suddenly said. "Lord Consul, I'm already very grateful for your hospitality. How would I dare to let you send me personally again? This will make me feel uneasy." Canios was both moved and tactfully declined. "Ha ha ha!" Avenogis laughed loudly. "You don't have to thank me. It's just along the way. The Temple of Hades in the city of Thurii has been completed. Dionia has invited me to attend the ceremony." Avenog's teasing made Canios a little embarrassed, but he was even more surprised by what he said. The Temple of Hades? Hearing that Heraclide fainted during the completion of the Temple of Hades and was unconscious, the Devers immediately pushed away all their affairs and quickly rushed to his home. Chapter 260. Herpes stood beside the bed and shook his head at Devers with a solemn expression. Devers walked to the bedside with heavy steps and stared at the skinny old man. Heraclid did not react to the arrival of the Devers. The Devers held his right hand, which was only skin and bones and was still covered with dust. The Devers did not mind it at all and said in a deep and sincere voice, "Heraclid, thank you for your contribution to Dionia. Your name will be forever remembered by the people of Dionia." Devers's words seemed to have worked. Heraclid slowly closed his eyes, and his breathing gradually disappeared. Herpes hurried over and pressed his head against Lidou's chest. He listened carefully and reached out his hand to feel Lidou's breath. Finally, he shook his head and said softly, "He went." Soon, the courtyard, which was filled to the brim with people, was filled with cries. All the architects, craftsmen, engravers, slaves, all fell into grief. The Devers murmured in a low voice, "Elysium welcomes you. Hades will shelter you. You will be a guest of Hades. You will build a splendid palace for his residence. Whether it is on earth or in heaven, the great name of Hades will be sung." Little Heraclid, who was crying beside him, listened to the Devers' eulogy. He wiped away his tears and thanked the Archon. The Devers patted him on the shoulder to comfort him and said, "The inauguration ceremony of the Hades Holy Temple will be held the day after tomorrow. I need you to find the best sculptor to make a bust of your father in 2 days. He will be the first person to enter the Holy Temple for the people to worship." This was a glorious event. Little Heraclid immediately stopped crying out of excitement. After thinking for a while, he turned around and said a few words to another grieving man. The man came over and bowed respectfully to the Devers. At the same time, he said excitedly, "Mr. Devers, it's an honor for my teacher to receive such respect from you. It is also the glory of all architects and craftsmen. I'll immediately look for the best sculptor. I'll definitely complete the sculpture within 2 days. Piasecos, I've heard Heraclid mention you many times." Devers nodded and encouraged him. "Heraclid is gone. As his most outstanding disciple, not only do you have to continue to pass on his skills, but you also have to delve into new construction techniques and bring out more outstanding students. Amandolera, Nudum, Grimentum, Cremissa, Asprustum, and so on. In the future, there will be more cities waiting for you to redesign them and make them as clean, functional, and beautiful as Turii. I hope that when you grow old, you can also enter the virtuous temple like your teacher." The Devers' words caused Piasecos' heart to surge with emotion. On the way back to the city, the Devers called for Plazinas and listened to his arrangements for the inauguration ceremony of the Temple of Hades. Finally, Plazinas said, "All the celebrations now, including your lighting of the sacred fire, have been rehearsed many times to ensure that there will be no major mistakes. There's only one problem that needs to be solved. We still lack a priest to manage the temple. According to the tradition of the aristocratic era, the consul had the right to worship, so he also served as the high priest. Now, with the power and prestige of the Devers, not to mention the fact that he was Hades's favored one, it had always been reasonable for him to serve as the high priest. However, the choice of the priest who presided over the daily affairs of the temple was difficult for the Senate. As one of the 12 main gods of Greece, although Hades was also worshipped, because of his death and dark characteristics, almost no city had built a special temple for him. Therefore, he did not have a public priest. There was once a Turii senator who proposed to invite the believers of the Eleusis ritual, which was once popular in Athens, but it was opposed by everyone. This was because the Eleusis ritual worshipped Persephone, the wife of Pluto, and Demeter, the goddess of fertility, not Hades himself. However, it was not appropriate to let the priests of other gods take over, so the Senate had been arguing about it. Of course, this also had to do with the Devers' refusal to take a stand. At this time, the Devers did not seem to realize that he was the culprit of this problem. He did not directly respond to Plesina's words, but looked at the Senate senator in front of him with great interest. From an enemy when they first met, to a political helper who cooperated well with him, Plesina's loyalty and unique talent made him admire him very much. Plesinas, you have done a good job in presiding over the construction of the Temple of Hades. What do you plan to do next? Plesinas was excited, thinking that the Devers were going to reward him according to his contributions. He immediately said, I want to run for the Supreme Supervisor next year. The Devers nodded his head. Because he was walking with only a team of guards behind him, when the tourists saw him, they saluted him respectfully. Of course, he also nodded to the people from time to time. He took the opportunity to say, the woman who saluted just now is from Lucaria, and she should believe in Asinu. This one is from Thrace, and the gods they believe in the most should be Dionysus and Ares. As for that one, you see, the citizens of Dionia come from all over the Mediterranean Sea, and they believe in hundreds and thousands of gods. In the future, as the territory of Dionia continues to expand, the number of races that become citizens of Dionia will also increase, and the number of gods in the Dionia alliance will also increase. Although the strong military power of Dionia protects the lives of the citizens, and the advanced and elegant culture will increase the citizens' sense of belonging, here. The Devers pointed to his head and said solemnly, it is chaotic. Once Dionia encounters a major disaster, I'm afraid it will be difficult for the people to unite and overcome the difficulties together. In that case, all our efforts will be in vain. Since ancient times, the Greeks had always believed in polytheism, so they rarely cared about the beliefs of other races. Plesinas didn't expect that the Devers would make this religious issue sound so serious, and he wondered what the Devers' intention was. Have you heard of the Jews? The Devers suddenly asked. I think someone said that they were a race that was good at business in Persia. Plesinas tried hard to recall. The Jews at this time were not like the Jews under the peaceful rule of the Roman Empire hundreds of years later. They could freely do business and settle everywhere, and thus frequently had conflicts with the Greek. Because at this time, the western Mediterranean Sea was controlled by two races that were good at business, the Greeks and the Carthage. The Jews had no foothold in the western Mediterranean Sea at all, so they were less known. The Jews are not only good at business, they are also a monotheistic religion, and only believe in one God. One and only God. Plesinas couldn't believe his ears. Among the many kingdoms, city-states, and races in the Mediterranean Sea, there was actually a race that only believed in one God. Yes, the Jews only believe in one God. The Devers gave him an affirmative answer and said seriously, the Jews are a weak race. They first lived in Egypt and were enslaved by the Egyptian pharaoh. Their life was difficult until a Jewish hero, Moses, appeared and led the Jews to escape from Egypt after many hardships. After decades of wandering and bloody killings, they finally seized the land of Canaan and established their own country. But the good times didn't last long. The Assyrians of Mesopotamia destroyed the Jewish kingdom and sent all the Jews to Babylon as slaves. It wasn't until King Cyrus of Persia destroyed Assyria that the Jews were released. They returned to their homeland and rebuilt their country and religion. During the hundreds of years of turmoil in Asia, many other races that once lived with the Jews had perished. But the Jews endured hardships and survived tenaciously. Why? The Devers paused and gave Plesinas time to think, then said in a deep voice, because their faith is firm and they worship one and only God, so they always remain united. In the face of other more brilliant races and civilizations, they didn't lose themselves and forget the roots of their race. Plesinas thought about what the Devers said. He understood what the Devers wanted to express and said hesitantly, Sir, the Greeks believe in many gods, and the people of Dionia believe in even more gods. This is a tradition that has been passed down and rooted in our blood. If we force them to believe in one god, I'm afraid there will be big trouble." Seeing the worried look on Plazina's face, the Devers smiled and said, "Of course I won't make such a stupid proposal, but we can take the initiative to guide the people to believe in Hades, so that the people of Dionia from all places and races can be as close to each other as possible. Am I right?" "Sir, even if we build the Temple of Hades, the habits of the Greeks won't change easily. They pray to Poseidon when they go out to sea, Hermes when they do business, and Demeter when they are farmers. The Greeks are very realistic. If they need anything, they will pray to the gods. It's impossible to only pray to Hades." Plazines shook his head and said. Chapter 261. The temples of the traditional Greek city-states are like high and mighty nobles, waiting for the people to donate gold and silver to build a sacred treasury, but they rarely take the initiative to help the citizens of the city-states who are in trouble. The priests and saintesses of the Temple of Hades should use the gold and silver donated by the people to help the poor people, help the patients who can't afford to see a doctor, listen to the doubts and troubles of the people of the Alliance, and use words to enlighten and dispel their confusion. Also, the annual slave liberation ceremony should be hosted by the temple. Plazines, the Temple of Hades can provide so much help to the people of Dionia. How can the people not be grateful to the temple and believe in it? The words of the Devers seemed to have opened a window for Plazines. The method that the Devers proposed was different from the traditional temples, but it made him vaguely see the bright future of the Temple of Hades. He was excited for a moment, but he did not know what to say. The Elysee is the paradise built by the Hades in hell, and his temple should be the paradise of the world, the home of the people's souls. When the time comes, we will build a temple of Hades in every city of Dionia, and unite people from all places and races around it. Then, the Dionia Alliance will have nothing to fear. Devers' tempting voice rang clearly in Plazines' ears. "Plazines, are you willing to help me complete this great cause and become the senior priest of the Temple of Hades?" Plazines looked at the Devers' expectant eyes, weighed the pros and cons in his heart, and then nodded heavily. "I am willing." Canios followed Avenogis to Turiae and stayed in the hotel on the south side of the Victory Square. This large hotel was built by the Senate of the Alliance, and was specially used to receive foreign guests. Usually there were many rooms, but now it was overcrowded. The generals of Corunna, Trine, Cirium, and Crotone were invited to attend the ceremony, as well as the famous counselors and citizens of the city-states of the Southern Alliance. If it were not for the fact that Amicus and others of Castellan were temporarily staying at the homes of Cunigarata and Cornelis, the leaders of the Lucaria tribes of Nudum and Gramentum were staying at the homes of Vespa and Hemont, and the Avenogis of Laus were even staying at the home of the Devers, thus reducing the task of the officials in charge. The hotels in Turiae were definitely not enough. At this time, the lobby of the hotel was very lively. The distinguished guests were from different cities, but they belonged to the same alliance. It was rare for them to gather together, so they took this opportunity to visit each other, bond, and discuss their views on current affairs. As an outsider, Canos was received politely by the Dionysians, but his request to visit Dace immediately was not well received. The person in charge told him, "The Consul Devers is busy preparing for tomorrow's ceremony. He will only have time to meet him after tomorrow." Although he envied the chatter and laughter of others, Canios and his men stayed quietly in the room, because he heard that the envoy of Picassus had also arrived in Turiae, and he wanted to avoid conflict when they met. It was not until he tasted the unique cuisine of Turiae that Canios' anxiety was temporarily alleviated. On the morning of the 25th of July, 398 BC, the citizens, families, freedmen, and even slaves of Dionia gathered from all directions in the city of Turiae. With the help of thousands of Dionia militia to maintain order, they entered the center of Turiae. In a short period of time, all the courtyards, houses, and even the roofs were filled with people. At a glance, it was a sea of people. It was a spectacular sight. Only the large empty space in the Victory Square was left untouched. Khanios was arranged to sit on the left step of the platform in front of the square. It was said that the envoy of Pegasus was arranged to sit on the right. The attentiveness of the Dionia staff allowed him to avoid the awkwardness of a sudden meeting, and allowed him to calm down and enjoy the ceremony. Oh, there are so many people. Dionia is really bold. Aren't they afraid that, if there is a riot, it will be a disaster here? Someone beside Khanios said worriedly. It's better if there is a riot. If that happens, Dionia will be finished. Another person said loudly, taking pleasure in the misfortune of others. Like the others, Khanios turned around to look at him. Euthydemus, why would the Crotone let you into the council? If there is a riot here, do you think we can escape? Someone recognized the speaker and retorted loudly. Why should we escape? Isn't this the celebration of the completion of the Temple of Hades? Isn't it better for us to meet the Temple of Hades together? Euthydemus said fearlessly. The proud Crotone are actually using words to satiate their disappointment after their defeat. Someone immediately mocked. Euthydemus' expression changed immediately. Khanios was not in the mood to care about the verbal conflict between the people around him. He only carefully observed the surroundings of the square. With so many people here, it should be very noisy. But the people were either sitting or standing, trying to be as quiet as possible. They rarely moved around. Perhaps they had been warned by the alliance in advance. But for the Greeks who valued freedom, this was quite a shocking performance. Yesterday, when Khanios entered the city of Thurii, he noticed this. Now, his impression of the Greeks was strengthened once again. At this time, a loud bugle sounded, announcing that the ceremony was about to begin. The people consciously stopped talking and focused their curious eyes on the Victory Square. Hundreds of men in Greek armor entered the square. Plesinas led 10 male messengers and 50 women, all dressed in white robes, onto the platform with solemn steps. The culture of Dionia was relatively open. Many people outside the square had brought their wives and daughters to watch the ceremony. But for dozens of women to appear in public at the same time, especially on such a sacred occasion, even the priestesses of Hera or the temple of Aphrodite, the goddess of love, did not have so many. So not only the people, but even the distinguished guests from the alliance in front of the square began to whisper among themselves. The uniform bugle sounded again throughout the city, and the square was quiet again. Plesinas' loud and long voice sounded. In the first year of the 95th Olympia, in the kingdom of Persia thousands of miles away from us, a group of Greek warriors were recruited by Cyrus the Little, the prince of Persia, who loved Greece, to overthrow the cruel king of Persia. However, after a war, their employer died in battle, and the leaders of the mercenaries were deceived and captured by the Persia. The whole mercenary team fell into despair, but the great Hades did not abandon them. As soon as Plesinas' voice trailed off, a dozen harpists under the platform began to pluck the strings. The 50 women in white robes on the stage opened their mouths at the same time, and their ethereal singing swept through the audience like a breeze. Khanios shivered, and he felt the hairs on his skin stand up. The traditional hymns of the Greek temples were obviously incomparable to the harmony trained by modern bel canto. Bathed in the beautiful and harmonious singing, even his soul seemed to be cleansed. Like Khanios, the other people in the audience were completely intoxicated by the singing. In the weeping hymns, they were also affected by the heaviness. The soldiers on the field used exaggerated body movements to show their weeping, helplessness, and despair. Only the person in the center was lying on the ground, motionless. At this time, the singing gradually weakened to silence, and the soldiers on the field also began to fall asleep. Just when the people were feeling lost, a high-pitched singing sounded again, like lightning cutting through the night sky, lifting the spirits of the audience. A man walked out of the tunnel. He was tall and strong, with long black hair and a thick black beard. He was wearing a black robe, holding a double fork in his hands, and walked to the center of the square with a dignified expression. Someone in the audience exclaimed, "Hades? I know he is Hades." There was a small commotion in the crowd, and more people stared at the field. They had begun to be attracted by this unique performance. They saw Hades come to the center of the field, standing next to the man who had been lying motionless, waving his double fork as if he was using divine power. The singing disappeared again. Hades left the field, and the people turned to look at him. Dong! Dong! The crisp sound of drums rang out in the silent square. The man who was lying turned over and sat up. He began to wake the others up, waving his arms to encourage them. Finally, the crowd gathered around him. Someone put on a helmet with a red crown, and then they lined up in front of him and moved forward with difficulty under his leadership. Seeing this, the people who had heard of the legend of the Archon Devers vaguely understood that the dazzling leader on the field should be playing the role of the Devers who had once conquered Persia. Devers seems to have forgotten that he was not the only mercenary leader in Persia. Tormid, who was also watching the celebration from the side, complained. "Yesterday, Devers came to me and told me about this. He said that it was necessary for the performance, and he hoped that I could understand." Xanthoparis shrugged, looking calm. "Well, this is Dionia, he has the final say," Tormid said helplessly. "But this kind of performance is quite interesting." The sound of drums grew louder and louder, mixed with the bugle call. "Wow!" Accompanied by the exclamations of the audience, groups of soldiers appeared in the tunnel. There were cavalry, infantry, and archers. They wore long robes and held long shields in their hands. They were in a loose formation, and under the command of a general in shining golden scale armor, they approached the Greek mercenaries in the square. Chapter 262. The Greek soldiers on the field seemed to have heard the cheers. They immediately put on their helmets, picked up their shields, and put on their red cloaks. They formed a tight phalanx to resist the enemy's attack. However, there were too many Persia. They swarmed forward and surrounded the warriors. The cavalry galloped back and forth on the periphery. The archers kept shooting arrows into the sky. All of them had their arrowheads shaved off. The infantrymen let out strange laughter. The audience could only see the dazzling red and the roars of the warriors through the gaps between the Persia encirclement. The drum beats became denser and louder. Under the attack of the Persia, the Greek phalanx retreated step by step. They were about to retreat to the edge of the square. The attention of the ordinary people was completely attracted by the tense scene on the field. Someone shouted anxiously, "Fight, Greeks!" The shout resonated with the audience. "Fight, Greeks!" The audience also began to shout loudly. At this moment, the sonorous singing sounded again. Hades was standing at the forefront of the platform. He slowly waved his trident. The surrounded Greek soldiers suddenly roared in unison, "Hey! Ho! Hades! Ho!" Dozens of bugles sounded at the same time. The Persia began to retreat and finally collapsed. The red phalanx of the Greek mercenaries was fully displayed in front of the audience. Under the strong rhythm of the drumbeats, they marched in a uniform and powerful pace, charging forward like an iron wall. The audience felt their blood boiling. Those who had not seen or participated in the military training of Dionia and the VIPs were captivated by the strength and beauty of the soldiers on the field. They cheered loudly. The general of Persia fell behind. He was dragged off his horse by the Devers, who charged in front. He stepped on the body of the general of Persia, raised his spear, and pierced the chest of the enemy with an exaggerated and infectious movement. "Devers! Devers! Devers!" The audience could not help but burst into thunderous cheers. Previously, Lord Consul said that he would let us see a completely different temple celebration, and he really did it. Marigi, who was standing behind the platform, glanced at his Senate colleagues with different expressions and sighed loudly. "Yeah, it's a very different kind of celebration." Lord Devers is afraid that the people will forget his heroic deeds in the past, so he didn't forget to promote himself on such a sacred occasion, Polixus said in a strange tone. Cunigarata and Cornelius looked at each other. They didn't say anything, but they were a little uneasy. He really did it. Haven't you noticed? This would be a new kind of drama, one that would not be performed by one or two people. Instead, it would be performed by hundreds and thousands of people, recreating the spectacular scenes of history. On the other hand, Ansitanos was so excited that he was almost incoherent. The Devers had enlightened him. The beautiful chorus, the musical accompaniment, the hundreds of people fighting and performing that were close to a real battle. It really shocked the audience, even the Senate elders. "I'm looking forward to the next performance," Mirza exclaimed sincerely. This reminded him of the difficult times in Persia. His words were also the common voice of the former mercenaries. However, Amyntas curled his lips and muttered in a low voice, "The battle scene is too fake. Didn't you hear Ansitanos? This is just acting, not a real battle. Look at the excited people. The Devers are using this kind of performance to tell them about our heroic deeds." Antonios, who was next to him, criticized Amyntas in a low voice. "The one playing the Devers should be Oliver's, right? He's really good. Let's Persia General is not good enough. He's like a block of wood." Epicthenus's rather interesting comments attracted the former mercenary elders to join in. Next, Hades led the mercenaries to Greece, the Lucarians invaded Thurii, and the mercenaries defeated the Lucanian alliance, Vespa, Hemont, and the rest of the Lucarians watched the square anxiously. Obviously, the Devers had taken their feelings into consideration. They only skimmed over the harm the Lucanians had done to the Thurii, and instead focused on the last scene. Under the cheerful accompaniment of songs and drums, Hades asked the Devers to lead the Greeks and Lucanians to reconcile. They wrestled, fought goats, drank, and laughed merrily. In the end, they held hands and formed a large circle, with Hades standing in the center. The crowd sang the song of Hades loudly, swinging their arms and kicking their legs, and kept expanding and shrinking the circle. The atmosphere was very lively, attracting the people outside the square to join in. The song of Hades resounded throughout the city. As the lord of the underworld, Hades was said to be dark, cruel, and feared. Therefore, among the Greeks, he was far less popular than the main gods such as Zeus, Poseidon, and Apollo. Canios liked and disliked Hades as much as the rest of the Greeks, so when he heard that Dionia wanted to make Hades the patron god of the city-state alliance, he was shocked. But now, he was attracted by the wonderful performance in the square and had a good impression of Hades. He could not help but join the crowd in singing the song of Hades. Not only him, but the leaders of Lucaria, who only worshipped the god of Asinus, asked the people around them the meaning of the song in strange and stiff Greek. Some of them even hummed along. Compared to the majority of the people of Dionia, the VIPs of the Southern Alliance who were invited to the ceremony had their own thoughts. Some of them even hoped that Dionia would make a fool of itself in the ceremony, such as the people of Crotone. But at this moment, the chief general of Crotone, Lucius, who was also shocked by the unprecedented worshipping ceremony in Greece, sighed, "It seems that the faith of Hades will really take root among the people of Dionia. We, the Greeks of the Western Mediterranean, believe in Hera and Apollo the most, and believe in the dark Hades. Only the barbaric outsiders of Dionia would do this," Ascamas said indignantly. His good friend Myron was expelled because he was defeated by Dionia, so he had some resentment in his heart. Moreover, Crotone had the most magnificent temple of Apollo in Great Greece. Greeks from other city-states often went there to worship, so although the performance in the square amazed him, he still complained confidently, "Look, it's almost noon, and the weather is so hot. When can we go see the Temple of Hades? Yeah, my legs are going numb from standing," another general of Crotone said in a seemingly joking manner, causing a commotion among the VIPs. "Dong! The loud and long bell suddenly rang, causing the hearts of the people who were disappointed because of the end of the performance to tremble. "Look, it's the Temple of Hades!" someone in the crowd exclaimed. In the northwest of Victory Square, on the hill behind the Senate Hall, the building, which was half covered by scaffolding and large pieces of linen in the morning, had completely revealed its true appearance when the people were concentrating on the performance in the square, a towering, magnificent white building shining under the hot sun. Plesinas took the lead, followed by the 50 saintesses in white robes, the senators of the Senate, the VIPs of various city-states, the people on the north side of the square, and the people on the south side of the square. Under the orderly guidance of the soldiers, the people slowly moved towards the Temple of Hades in an orderly manner. The bronze bell was still being rung at a steady pace, and each sound was clearer and deeper than the previous one, soothing the people's anxious mood. The Temple of Hades was getting closer, and it became clearer in the eyes of the people. It was a very unique temple. Its height was no different from other temples, but its length was twice as long as the Temple of Crotone Apollo, the largest of all the city-states in Greece. More importantly, as the location of the guardian temple of a city-state, according to tradition, it was also the center of a city-state. It had to be surrounded by walls to protect it, and become the Acropolis of Turin, just like the Temple of Apollo in Turin. But not only was there no wall on the hillside ahead, there were stone steps from the east, west, south, and north, which made it very convenient to go straight to the temple. Antares, who had just joined the Senate not long ago, curiously asked Cornelius, who had been getting along well with him, "Why doesn't this new temple have walls?" Cornelius answered seriously, "This is the suggestion of Lord Devers. He thinks that without walls, the people can freely go to the temple to offer sacrifices and pray, to show the love of Hades for the people of Dionia." The Devers were the favored ones of Hades, and the high priests of the temple. Usually, no one would object to the suggestion of the temple of Hades. Antares looked at the temple in front of him. The century-old tradition still puzzled him. But this way, Turin will have no Acropolis. Cornelius sighed, and his expression became a little strange. He said, "Lord Devers insisted that no more Acropolis be built in Turin," he said. At this point, the usually gentle governor of Amendolarus' tone became a little more firm. "The cities in the alliance of Dionia are the walls of the alliance, and Turin is the Acropolis of the alliance. Dionia does not need any more Acropolis." When Antares heard this, he was stunned. Using the city as a wall? Treating the whole region as a city? A sense of heroism rose in his heart, and the figure of the young governor appeared in his mind. He could not help but be fascinated. What a broad-mindedness and boldness! No wonder he could build a powerful city-state alliance. Chapter 263. The bell stopped ringing, and Plesinas led the saintesses out of the crowd. They stood on both sides of the entrance of the temple, and began to sing in unison. This time, it was not just pure singing, but also lyrics. "God Hades is just and strict, your light shines on the earth, our hearts are full of passion, come to your holy temple, your light shines on us." Is this a new ode to Hades? The people were full of surprise. The unique melody was so beautiful and magnificent. As the song continued, they were deeply moved by the holiness and ideals of the song. Countless people knelt on the ground devoutly, silently chanting the ode to Hades, and tears of excitement flowed from their eyes. When the song ended, some people still couldn't get away from it until the people around them cheered, "Devers!" Only then did they realize that the Archon of Dionia, the high priest of the alliance, was wearing a white robe and a white scarf on his head. He was holding a torch in his hand as he appeared on a circular altar in front of the temple. Beside him, Plesinas and another priest were carrying a large, smooth, concave bronze mirror. The people widened their eyes in curiosity, because it was rumored that the elders of the Senate had a heated discussion about the sacred fire of the Temple of Hades. Because the sacred fire was not only the spirit of the Greek city-states, but also the inheritance of civilization, especially the Greek city-states in the western Mediterranean Sea. They were all colonial cities, and the sacred fire of the Acropolis couldn't be ignited by any random fire source. The colonists had always taken a little fire source from the temple of their mother state and kept it until the new city built a new temple. Only then would they use the fire source to ignite the sacred fire, and it would burn for generations to remember their homeland and pass on the fire. Therefore, the Turan-born elders, led by Polixus, proposed to bring the fire source from Athens again, but it was strongly opposed by Antonios, Amintas, and the others. The reason was that the old Turan no longer existed, and the new Turan was not a state of Athens. As for Cornelis's proposal to draw the fire seed from the temple of Zeus in Amendalar, it was also rejected. The Turii elders believed that the small city of Amendalar was not enough to represent the entire Dionia alliance. In the end, the Devers made the decision and said, since Dionia is a newly established city-state alliance, there is no mother state, and the Temple of Hades is almost the only guardian temple of a city-state in the Mediterranean Sea. In that case, I believe that Hades will bestow upon us the holy flame on the day of the celebration in the temple, to show his favor to Dionia. These words were spread throughout the city and quickly spread throughout the entire alliance. Now, be it the common people, the senators of the Senate, or the VIPs who had just received the news, they were all staring at the unlit torch in the hands of the high priest with curiosity and excitement. They were waiting for a miracle to happen, or perhaps they were looking forward to the biggest joke in Greece. Facing the entrance of the temple, the Devers half knelt on the altar with a solemn expression, holding the torch high in their hands. Plesinas and the high priest took a few steps back and raised the bronze mirror with difficulty. They slowly rotated it, adjusted the angle, and focused the hot sunlight on a cluster of papyrus extending from the top of the torch. The familiar song of Hades was sung by the adoratress once again, their voices echoing through the clouds. The noon sun was scorching everyone, but the sweaty people were completely unaware of it. Their attention was always focused on the motionless Devers. Time passed minute by minute. The bronze mirror was dazzling, but the torch was still the same, saying that Hades will bestow the holy flame. I think he is just being arrogant. Does he really think he can do anything? Polixus sneered in a low voice. He had contributed a lot to the speech of the Devers at the meeting being spread so widely and so quickly. He hoped to see the Devers make a fool of themselves at this moment, which would be a great blow to the prestige of this young consul. Berks nudged him with his hand, kindly reminding him to keep quiet. Polixus rolled his eyes back at him. Berks used to be his good friend, and now he was one of the strongest supporters of the Devers among the Turii senators in the Senate. If it weren't for certain reasons, Polixus wouldn't want to have anything to do with him anymore. Suddenly, he saw that the top of the torch seemed to be emitting green smoke. He thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, so he blinked hard. Exclamations came from all directions one after another. Soon, the green smoke turned into a small cluster of red and yellow flames, quickly igniting the linen soaked in olive oil. The flames were burning fiercely. Oh, Hades! The people who witnessed this miracle burst into a tsunami of cheers, and the whole hill seemed to be shaking. Even the VIPs looked at each other in disbelief. Is Dionia really blessed by Hades? Are the Devers really blessed by Hades? The senators looked at the Devers in front of them in awe, and Polixus' body was trembling slightly. He seemed to see the majestic eyes of Hades staring straight at him from the torch held high by the Devers. The Devers secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Although he had practiced several times before, and even specially chose a sunny day to perform in the square, he was still a little nervous. After all, this was in front of tens of thousands of people. If he messed it up, his meticulous plan and the prestige of the God-favored would be ruined. Fortunately, with the blessing of Hades, he succeeded. The Devers slowly stood up, held the torch high, and slowly walked around, solemnly enjoying the cheers of the people. Like the waves in a storm, pushing him to the peak again and again. Then, accompanied by the priests, he walked into the temple and lit the dark bronze braziers in front of the statue of Hades one by one. From now on, the holy fire of the temple of Hades would burn day and night, blessing the prosperity of Dionia. When the Devers walked out of the temple, a loud bugle sounded, accompanied by a low drum beat. The 3 legion commanders, Capys, Drax, and Hieronymus, led by 8 captains in full military uniform, each carrying 3 stone tablets. Under the escort of 40 captains, they arrived in front of the temple. When most of the people looked at the 3 stone tablets in confusion, the words of the high priest, with the help of the voice transmitter, were transmitted to the ears of the people. The establishment and development of the city-state alliance of Dionia cannot be separated from the blessing of Hades. It cannot be separated from the efforts of the people. Today, when we are enjoying peace and prosperity, please do not forget the brave warriors who sacrificed their lives to protect Dionia. Their names are engraved on these 3 stone tablets. Hades appreciates their loyalty and bravery to the Alliance, allowing their souls to enter the temple and turn into heroic spirits to continue to protect Dionia, and to accept the worship of the descendants of Dionia. After that, the Devers knelt in front of the stone tablets with a solemn expression. Then, the legion commander, the captains, and all the soldiers present knelt in front of the stone tablets with a solemn expression. In the eyes of the people, the stone tablets that were engraved with words were no longer cold stones, but vivid figures with names, sob, sob, sob. Other than the distinguished guests, the mountains and plains were filled with kneeling Dionia citizens. In this solemn atmosphere, there was an uncontrollable cry. Those who were crying were the families of the soldiers who died in the battle. The brave warriors do not die, the heroic spirits live forever. The brave warriors do not die, the heroic spirits live forever. The Devers led the people to kowtow to the stone tablet. At this moment, the grass and trees were sentimental, and the heavens and the earth mourned together. A strong wind blew at the right time, even the sun was blocked by the clouds, which made the people believe that their cries were answered. For a time, the people's prayers lasted for a long time. The bugle and war drums were played in unison. The generals and captains walked in neat steps, carrying the stone tablets into the temple under the watchful eyes of thousands of people. I can't believe the people of Dionia revere the warriors to such an extent. Lysias had heard that Dionia held a triumphal ceremony for the victorious returning army. At this moment, he could not help but be moved when he saw the stone tablets of the dead being sent into the temple. With such a sacred act, how can the citizens of Dionia not be willing to fight to the death? Ascamas, the commander of the Crotone navy, was no longer in the mood to mock them. Instead, he looked solemn. He and Lysias looked at each other, thinking about the same question. If there was another war with Dionia in the future, could the Crotone defeat the people of Dionia with such high morale? The VIPs from the Southern Alliance more or less felt the same way. For Canos of Elia, he was happy to see the strength of Dionia. After the drums and horns stopped, the harp sounded again. Amidst the melodious sound of the harp, Heraclide Jr. and Piasix carried a stone bust to the front of the temple. People of Dionia, please tell me, who designed the new city of Turii? Who led us in building it? The Devers asked loudly. It was Heraclide. The reply was intermittent. Who designed and built the temple of Hades? The Devers asked again. Heraclide. This time, the reply was much more orderly. Whether it was the construction of the new city or the temple, who was the first to arrive and the last to leave every day? Who was gravely ill, but still devoted all his energy to the construction of the city that he loved so much, and finally sacrificed his life for it? The Devers asked loudly again, who is he? Heraclide. The orderly and powerful reply echoed in the hills. In view of the contribution of Heraclide, the master architect, to Dionia, his statue will be placed in the sage hall of the temple, and he will be favored by Hades. He will continue to use his talents to contribute to the Elysium. At the same time, in the future, as long as there are people of Dionia who have made great contributions to the prosperity and development of Dionia, their statues will also be placed in the Temple of the Sage, and their souls will coexist with the Alliance. Due to the miracle of the Holy Flame, the Devers were like Hades at this moment, and his words were naturally more motivating to the people. Chapter 264. When the Devers bowed respectfully to the bust of Heraclides, the people also saluted and prayed, hoping that they would receive the same blessing when they died. When the statue was carried into the temple, it was already afternoon. Although the people were a little tired, they were still in high spirits because of the new rituals that they had never held before. Today there was only the last one left, which was also the most important one, visiting the temple and praying. Under the command of the Devers, the soldiers maintained order, and the people consciously obeyed the order, entering the temple in batches. After experiencing the previous ritual, Canio's impression of Hades had greatly improved. At this moment, he was eager to enter the temple and find out what was going on. Following the crowd, he walked up the steps and stepped onto the pedestal of the temple. There was a statue on each side of the main entrance of the temple. On the left side was a handsome young man playing the harp attentively. On the right side was a beautiful woman twirling her clothes. With a smile on her face, she looked at the young man gently. The two milky white marble statues had smooth lines and were lifelike. The affectionate gaze between the two created a pleasant and beautiful mood. Canio's eyes wandered back and forth between the two statues until someone exclaimed, "Is this the hero Orpheus and his beautiful wife Eurydice?" After being reminded, Canio's took a closer look and found that it was indeed the case, because their names were engraved on the pedestal of the statues. Orpheus was the son of Apollo, the god of the sun, and Calliope, the goddess of literature and art. He was a hero in ancient Greek legend, and no one could compete with him in singing and playing the harp. His wife Eurydice passed away after being bitten by a poisonous snake. Orpheus, who loved her deeply, ventured into the underworld and moved Hades and Queen Hades with his beautiful singing. They allowed him to take away Eurydice's soul, but before leaving the underworld, he was not allowed to look at Eurydice, or she would stay in the underworld forever. Orpheus kept his promise and trekked with his wife. When he was about to leave the underworld, he accidentally looked at his wife, causing Eurydice to be captured and sent back to the underworld. Orpheus fell into remorse and died of depression. But at this moment, what the two statues showed was not sadness or resentment, but happiness and warmth. Affected by this emotion, Canio's entered the temple with a calm mind. What he saw were the 3 stone tablets that were carried into the temple. This was the Valhalla. Canio saw the letters engraved on the eaves. The martyr's palace was only a side hall of the divine temple. It wasn't very big, and the 4 walls were decorated with colorful paintings. Canius looked at it carefully. The main drawing on it was a magnificent war scene of the former mercenaries crossing the sea to save the people, fighting the barbarians, building a new city, and creating an alliance. Even as an outsider, Canhos could not help but sigh at the hardships of Dionia. But unlike the Dionia people, he did not kowtow devoutly. Instead, he walked to the brazier and bowed before leaving from the side door. There was another side hall on the right. That must be the sage temple that the people had been talking about. It seemed that there were already many people inside. Canhos went straight ahead, crossed the middle gate, and entered the main hall of the temple. The main hall was more than 20 meters high. As soon as he entered, he immediately felt how small he was. In front of the main hall stood a bronze statue that was more than 10 meters tall. Its huge figure also gave off a strong sense of oppression. Fortunately, this statue of Hades did not show the ferocious face of the legends. Instead, it was the image of a benevolent and amiable elder. Beside him was another statue of the beautiful queen of the underworld, Persephone. She held her husband's arm and smiled at all living beings. The most feared of the Greek gods, Hades, was now in harmony with the queen, giving people a sense of closeness. Looking at the floor, it was made of carefully selected marbles that were as smooth as a mirror. The four walls were still painted with colorful paintings of dense forests, verdant mountains, and green grasslands. There were also all kinds of rare beasts, celestial couples, and celestial envoys. Humans were also laughing and playing among them, happy and contented, getting along very harmoniously. It was a fascinating sight. Sunlight shone in from the atrium in the middle of the temple and from the windows on both sides of the temple, complementing the bright colors in the temple, making the main hall even more magnificent, as if one was in a fairyland. Many of the Dionians were mesmerized by it, and they murmured, "Élysée? This is Élysée paradise." They actually knelt in front of the holy fire, and did not want to get up for a long time. The soldiers who maintained the order could only urge them again and again. Seeing this scene, Caeneus could not help but sigh. The people of Dionia were bold and ingenious. They turned hell into a paradise, and the evil gods into good gods. In such a warm place, there was no need to worry that there would not be people coming to worship. Caeneus walked out of the temple, and could not help but recall the beautiful scene in the temple. The temple on the other side is so scary. Many people dare not go in. No way. It's nice inside. If it weren't for the soldiers, I would still want to stay in there. Over there. That side is completely different from this side. If you don't believe me, you can go and see. Caeneus heard the voices of the people, and he was stunned. There was another temple? No, there was only one here. Could it be? Impossible. Many people were as shocked as Caeneus. It was normal to be surprised. After all, the temples of the ancient Greek city-states had always been dedicated to one god. The statue of Porphone, the queen of Hades, appeared in this temple, which was already a bold breakthrough. Fortunately, people regarded Porphone as a subordinate of Hades, so they were not too surprised. But they never expected that the designers would have an even bolder way to divide the temple into two parts. One temple, two gods. No wonder the length of the temple of Hades was twice the length of an ordinary temple. Driven by doubts and curiosity, Caeneus quickly passed through the corridor outside the temple, which was supported by a dozen huge Dorian stone pillars, and came to the other side of the temple. Sure enough, there was another entrance to the temple, and it was also crowded with people. There were also two stone statues on both sides of the main entrance, but they were black. They were the ferryman of the underworld river, Cologne, and the guardian of the gate of hell, the three-headed dog, Cerberus. Their ferocious appearance made Caeneus's heart skip a beat. Walking into the entrance, there was a side hall with the words, "Prison of the Wicked," engraved on it. In the middle was a ferocious statue of Thanatos, the god of death, holding a sharp sword, and on both sides were engraved black letters. Traitors must go to this prison. Murderers must go to this prison. Rapists must go to this prison. At the end of every sentence there was a bloody skull, which made people feel a chill in their hearts. The four walls were all kinds of horrible pictures of ghosts torturing souls, which was even more creepy. Caeneus staggered out, and the horrible scene made him hesitate. Should he still go in? At this time, he saw the words, "Confessional," engraved on the side hall on the right, and next to it was a string of eye-catching words. "Repent, God will forgive." Caeneus calmed himself down and continued forward. He passed through the confessional and entered the main hall. It was a dark world. The floor was made of black marble, and the walls were black. There was no patio or window, so there was no sunlight. Only the brazier in front of the statue brought some light to the temple, but it did not add much warmth to the temple. Instead, the flickering flame cast a haze on everyone's face. There was more than one statue in front of him. The statue of Hades, which was more than 10 meters tall, no longer had the beautiful and gentle queen of Hades beside him. He was wearing a black robe and holding a double fork. He looked majestic, and his eyes seemed to be able to see through people's good and evil intentions. There were 3 8-meter-tall statues in front of him. They were the 3 judges of hell, Minos, Rhadamanthos, and Iagos. All of them looked solemn. One was holding a paper scroll, and the other was shouting. The one in the middle was holding a scale, with weights on one side and a bright red heart on the other. This was the only red color in the entire temple, but it made all the believers in the temple nervous and sweaty. It was so eye-catching, as if it was asking, "How is your conscience?" Canius walked out of the temple in a daze. Even the fresh air could not make him feel relaxed. This was simply a test of the soul. Kanos walked down the hill, and couldn't help but look back at the majestic temple. The people who came out from one side of the temple were smiling and happy. The people who came out from the other side looked solemn and thoughtful. Heaven and hell were polar opposites, but they were perfectly contained in a temple. The genius of the people of Dionia had built this strange temple. He did not know how it would affect the people of Dionia in the future. At dusk, the hustle and bustle of the city of Turii had not dissipated. The people on the streets were still talking about the temple celebration in the day. Of course, this included the famous Christoia restaurant. Canios chewed his bread and drank his mutton soup as he listened to their conversation. He knew that the strange design of the Temple of Hades was originally suggested by the consul Devers. Even every unprecedented ceremony in the celebration was arranged by him. This made him even more curious. What kind of person was the consul of Dionia? During the celebration, Canius only saw the Devers in front of the temple from afar. He looked young but had an extraordinary presence. When he remembered that he had not been received by the ruler of Dionia, Canius could not help but feel a little depressed. "Can I sit here?" A man came to the wooden table and asked politely. Canius nodded. "A big plate of tripe," the man shouted. Not long after he sat down, the piping hot food was served. He quickly scooped a big spoonful of sauce from the clay pot on the table with a wooden spoon and put it on the plate. It was a sauce made from shellfish from the sea. It tasted strange, and Canius was not used to it. But the man dipped the tripe in the sauce and ate it with relish. This is still the best. I haven't eaten it for a few months. I've been thinking about it every day. I'm dying of hunger." The man's intoxicated look made Canius smile. The man glanced at Canius and said, "Did you know that when the Greek mercenaries were in Persia, the Devers was just an ordinary soldier? He used the tripe to conquer the other soldiers' mouths and attracted everyone's attention. He later became the leader of the mercenaries." Chapter 265. "Oh, that's interesting." Kanos smiled and subconsciously sized up the man in front of him. He had a slender figure, a small face, and a hooked nose. He exuded a lively temperament amidst his gentleness. Noticing that Canios was looking at him, the man raised his head and smiled. "I've seen you in the VIP hotel in Turii. My name is Cypros and I'm from Trine." Canios hesitated for a moment and said in a low voice, "I'm from Elia." "Oh, Elia." Cypros did not seem too surprised. He looked at Canios and said seriously, "I've been to Elia a few times. Speaking of which, our Trine and Elia are in the same predicament. Trine's territory is often attacked by the Bruti, while Elia is always surrounded by the Lucanians. The difference is that we have the support of our allies, while you can only fight alone most of the time." Cypros's words struck a chord in Canios' heart. This feeling of empathy for Cypros made him feel good about Cypros, and he unconsciously leaned forward. "You're here to ask for help from Dionia on behalf of Elia, right?" Cypros said again. Canios hesitated again, and then said, "Elia is here to seek an alliance with Dionia." Cypros saw his concern and comforted him. "Don't worry, Dionia will definitely ally with you." Cypros's words shocked Canios. In the past 2 days in Turii, he had seen the power and prosperity of the Dionia, and he began to worry. The weak Elia would not be able to attract the interest of Dionia, and they would not want to provoke the ferocious Lucanians. At this moment, he dropped his guard and asked, "Why are you so sure?" "Because Elia's position is very important." Cypros picked up a piece of tripe with a wooden skewer and threw it into his mouth. After chewing it carefully, he said, "It will help Dionia unify the Lucanian region." "Dionia wants to take over the entire Lucanian region? How is that possible?" Khanios was shocked. "Of course it's possible. Dionia's political system determines its ambition to expand," Cypros said with certainty with a complicated expression on his face. "You mean?" Khanios suddenly understood. He looked around, lowered his head and whispered, "Dionia has a tyrant." A city-state with a tyrant was always cruel, greedy, and aggressive. Whether it was the tyrant of Syracuse, Gelon, and his successor, Chiron, the former tyrant of Lygium, Anaxilas, or the current Dionysius, they all proved this point one after another. Cypros shook his head. He was a man who was good at thinking. Ever since his last trip to Dionia, out of curiosity, he had been analyzing the reasons for its rapid rise. "Not exactly. I don't know if the consul Devers of Dionia is a tyrant. Although he is the highest commander of the Dionysian army, has the right to worship, and is also the highest administrator of the city-state alliance, but as the chief senator of the Senate, he has great influence, but he can't do whatever he wants. His proposals also require a majority of the Senate senators to pass. The appointment of high-ranking civil servants of the alliance must also be approved by the Senate, although he has the power of veto. The important matters of waging war and achieving peace are also decided collectively by the Senate. Unlike the tyrant who can easily decide the life and death of the citizens, his actions are still bound by the laws of the alliance. However, compared to the king of Sparta and the generals of the democratic city-states, there is no doubt that the consul has more power. Khanios listened carefully and thought, "No wonder I heard that the consul often doesn't need the protection of the guards in Turin, and often goes in and out of the streets of Turin alone, unlike Dionysius who lives in a palace and has thousands of mercenary guards to protect him. If that's the case, he is more like a democratic king." "A democratic king?" Cypros heard this and slammed the table in excitement. "That's the right word. It perfectly illustrates the position of the Devers in the Dionia alliance. It's because of the unique consul system of Dionia that Dionia's rapid rise to power." "You're saying that Dionia's power is due to Divers alone?" Khanios asked in surprise. Of course the Devers are very capable consul, but the political system of Dionia is also very unusual." Cypros finally found someone he could get along with, and Khanios's question was the perfect opportunity for him to elaborate on his thoughts. However, his throat was a little dry after eating too much sauce. He swallowed his saliva and said, "Khanios, do you drink beer? The beer in this shop tastes very good. I heard that the Devers specially instructed their slaves to brew it after many experiments. This person is not only very capable in military and political affairs, but also in business. No wonder he's called the Blessed." Beer was only a beverage for the people at the bottom of the city-state, but after hearing Cypros's words, Khanios was a little tempted. "2 big cans of beer," Cypros shouted. A long bottle with a slender neck was placed in front of Khanios. Khanios picked it up, and a faint sweet aroma wafted into his nostrils. He quickly took a sip, and the cool golden liquid flowed smoothly into his stomach, dispelling most of the heat in his body. He could not help but take another big gulp. "Not bad, right?" Cypros saw this and said proudly. Khanios nodded and burped. He could not wait to ask, "What's different about the system of Dionia that you mentioned?" Cypros did not keep Khanios in suspense anymore. He took a sip of beer and said slowly, "Whether it's Crotone or Ustrine, the highest authority is the Assembly of Citizens, which decides everything in the city-state. The second is the Council of Citizens, which has a reduced number of people, usually attended by at least 300 to 400 people, who discuss and resolve the general affairs of the city-state. The general elected by the Assembly of Citizens is only the highest executor of the decisions made by the Assembly and the Council, right? That's right. It's the same for Elia. The system of the democratic city-states in Greece is more or less the same. The system of Dionia comes from Armendalara, and Armendalara, I guess, after it broke away from Sybaris, like Heraclea and Metapontum, it was influenced by Tarentum. Since Tarentum is a subgroup of Sparta, its dual kings became dual archons, and the Council of Elders became the Senate. However, the archons are elected by the Assembly of Citizens. But after the Devers led the mercenaries to join Armendalara, not only did the Assembly of Citizens become the only archon for life, but the Assembly of Citizens has never been held. Cypros said in a deep voice. Dionia cancelled the Assembly of Citizens? Kanios almost cried out in surprise. Before talking to Cypros, based on his past understanding that the Devers were tyrants, Kanios would not be surprised if Dionia did not have an Assembly of Citizens. But Cypros had already told him that the Devers are not tyrants, and are also subject to the restrictions of the Senate. His understanding of Dionia was that it was a relatively normal city-state alliance, and that was why he overreacted when he heard what Cypros said. The Assembly of Citizens of Dionia has not been officially cancelled, but it has never been held. Cypros said slowly, I think that perhaps the situation of the Union of Dionia is unique, and that's why they did not hold it. After all, the citizens of Dionia are scattered across several cities, and their origins are complicated. There are Greeks and a considerable number of foreigners, such as Turii, Armendalarans, Cremissa. Holding an assembly of citizens is time-consuming, and it is easy for the citizens to quarrel over interests, and nothing can be decided. Kanios thought carefully and had to admit, perhaps, this may be an important reason. Just like Elia, even though we do not have many citizens, and all of them have lived in the city for generations, many important issues could not be agreed upon in every assembly, not to mention a new alliance like Dionia, where the citizens come from many different origins. Cypros patted the beer can with his hand, hesitated for a while, and then raised his head to take a sip of beer, and said, in fact, when the assembly deals with affairs, any issue, the citizens can easily express their opinions based on their own preferences and interests, rather than the interests of the city-state, and exercise the right of veto, which often leads to a problem that cannot be solved for a long time, especially in times of crisis. If the assembly cannot reach a consensus quickly, it will put the city-state in great danger. Because of this, Trine has been facing the invasion of the Bruttii for a long time, so we have a system different from the southern city-states, such as Crotone and Silatina. That is, once the enemy invades, Trine will immediately elect a general with the highest authority to decide all the affairs of the city-state during the war. In this way, endless discussions and disputes can be avoided. Kanios was delighted. Elia will also elect a dictator during the most difficult times of war, who will have the highest authority in the city-state, very similar to the general you mentioned. Chapter 266. Oh, which two? Karinos leaned forward curiously. The first. Cypros placed a wooden stick on the table unhurriedly and said, anyone can apply for citizenship of Dionia. Be it foreign vagrants, captured citizens of enemy states, or even freed slaves, as long as they meet the requirements of the bill, they can become citizens of Dionia. Karinos sucked in a breath of cold air. Elia did grant citizenship to some freedmen, but that was because of the war and the shortage of soldiers and labor. It was hard to imagine that Dionia would grant citizenship to the freedmen all the time like this. Does this mean that the citizenship of Dionia is not that important? Does it mean that the freedmen will not be able to enjoy so many rights in the alliance? And what kind of people can become citizens of the alliance? How can the order of the city be maintained? The citizenship of Dionia is very attractive. Cypros shook his head in the face of Karinos' many questions. Other rights aside, Just the right of every new citizen to be given 5 acres of land is enough to make the freedmen go crazy. Not to mention, according to the achievements of the citizens, they can also be given new land. Is this true? Carinos could not believe it. He could not help but gulp. For the citizens of Elia, who had been trapped in the city for a long time, land was a great temptation to them. Of course it's true. Otherwise, in the decisive battle between Dionia and Crotone, how could Dionia easily recruit 7,000 freedmen without spending any money, and how did the freedmen bravely help Dionia defeat Crotone? It's all because of the temptation of the citizenship of Dionia. Cypros looked around at the diners who were talking animatedly, and turned back to continue. As for whether the order of the city will be disrupted, there should be at least 20 to 30,000 people in Dionia at the ceremony today, right? It's the first time I've seen so many people attend a celebration or festival of the Alliance, and there's no big trouble. I'm afraid it's not just because there are a lot of patrolling soldiers there to maintain order, said Kanos. Cypros replied in a low voice, Of course, this has a lot to do with the laws of the Union of Dionia on the citizens and even the slaves. Turin not only had more patrols than other city-states, but it also had courts. Not only did these courts judge cases and disputes, but they also recorded the names of those who broke the law. If they are freedmen, it will affect whether they can obtain citizenship on time. If they are citizens, it will affect their land distribution. Therefore, for a better future, most people living in Dionia will consciously obey the laws here. That's a really good idea. Over time, the people of Dionia naturally developed the habit of obeying the law. No wonder. Canios could not help but praise. This solution can fundamentally solve the chaos that may be caused by the people of Dionia from a complicated background. I wonder who came up with this. He saw a smile on Cypros's face, and he immediately came to a realization. Could it be the Devers again? Cypros nodded. Canios shrugged helplessly. He had nothing else to say to the Consul of Dionia. What's the second law? Cypros's familiarity with Dionia and his unique views had deepened Canios' understanding of Dionia, and he was eager to know more. Substate. Cypros spat out 2 words, his eyes flashing with a strange light. The way Dionia deals with substates and territories is very different from most Greek city-states. What's the difference? Canios was once again attracted by Cypros's words and asked anxiously. Do you know about Asprustum? I've heard of it. It used to be a town of the Briti, and later became a substate of Crotone. I heard that it has now joined the Dionia Alliance. Take Asprustum as an example. Back then, what did the Crotone people do after occupying it? They killed all the Briti in the city, moved the landless Crotone citizens to Asprustum, and implemented the same system as Crotone. Cypros ate a piece of tripe and threw it into his mouth. With a sarcastic smile, he said, The residents of Asprustum are Crotone citizens, and their government is Crotone's government. Logically speaking, Asprustum has completely become a part of Crotone, but why did Asprustum have 2 riots in the past few decades, and they demanded to leave Crotone? There were 2 riots in Asprustum? Canios was slightly surprised. In his memory, Asprustum was a town of Crotone. Yes, 2 times. Cypros stretched out 2 fingers and slowly said, Because Crotone quickly quelled the riot and deliberately blocked the news, it's normal that Elia doesn't know about it since you're far away in the north. Although Asprustum was indeed a subsidiary of Crotone in the beginning, the situation has changed after 20 years. According to the law of Crotone, only men from Asprustum whose father was a citizen of Crotone could become a citizen of Crotone. As time passed, some foreigners came to Asprustum and married women in the city, but their children could not become citizens of Crotone, and could only become citizens of Asprustum. There were also some people who were born in this small city and grew up here. Their feelings for Asprustum surpassed that of Crotone, and they were unwilling to apply to become citizens of Crotone. As a result, there were more and more citizens of Asprustum in this small city than there were citizens of Crotone, and their willingness to protect the interests of Asprustum naturally surpassed the interests of Crotone. As for the people of Crotone, because of the distance between them and their bloodline, they treated the people of Asprustum more and more like slaves, not their own people. When there was a war, the people of Asprustum were at the forefront. When there was a land dispute, they sided with the people of Crotone. As a result, the people of Asprustum hated the people of Crotone more and more. How could they not demand independence? Hearing this, Canios nodded and took a big gulp of beer. The measures that Crotone took against Asprustum after the riots were to kill the people who were determined to resist the Crotone, and then move a large number of Crotone citizens to this small city. At the same time, they supported the people of Asprustum who were close to the people of Crotone, and let the people of Crotone hold the highest power in Asprustum. But after another 10 years, Asprustum was again rioted, and the situation was the same as the last time. As far as I know, the Greek city-states dealt with their colonies and occupied territories in the same way. Asprustum was very close to Crotone, and Crotone was a powerful city-state in Greater Greece. It had enough power to control a small town like Asprustum, but this still happened. Those states that were far away from the mother state, or the mother state was not strong enough, could not join forces with the mother state to strengthen their own power. This situation is very common, but it is still not bad. What is more terrible is that the mother state and the mother state become enemies. There are many such examples. Cypros sighed. His words reminded Canios of the mother state of Elia. Elia had sent messengers to the mother state for help, but the mother state turned a blind eye to Elia's plight and refused to provide any help. The two sides had become strangers. Canios was a little sad. You are right. As he said this, he raised his bottle and invited Cypros to drink. Wiping the foam from the corner of his mouth, he asked with interest, "How did Dionia treat the occupied territories?" Cypros picked up another wooden stick and placed it on the wooden table. He said slowly, "After Dionia occupied Asprustum, the first law they implemented was to declare that all the people of Asprustum who are willing to stay will become citizens of Dionia." Huh! Canios was surprised. Although there are only a few Asprustums who chose to stay, I think they made the right choice. Cypros emphasized and continued, "The second law that Dionia quickly implemented is that the Senate of Dionia will appoint public officials to govern Asprustum, and the highest governor of the city will be the city governor, who must be a senator of the Senate. I remember that the current governor of Asprustum is Helos of the Senate of Dionia, a senator who has a close relationship with the Devers. You see, the people of Asprustum are now citizens of Dionia, and the law of Dionia states that as long as either parent is a citizen of Dionia, their children will be citizens of Dionia when they are born. Furthermore, the ruler of Asprustum is directly appointed by the Senate, and any citizen of Dionia can apply for public office in the city. After a certain number of years of public office, those with rich experience and outstanding performance can become a senator of the Senate of Dionia. Chapter 267. Cypros continued, "Now Nudum and Gramentum, the two towns that once belonged to the Lucanians, are now part of the Dionia alliance, and many Lucanians have become citizens of Dionia. Then why would the other Lucanians really hate Dionia? On the contrary, with the help of Elia, Dionia can take advantage of the weakness of the Lucaria tribe to occupy the entire Lucania municipality, and increase the power of Dionia even more. So how could Dionia not form an alliance with Elia?" Canios was silent, thinking about every word that Cypros said. After a long time, he said, "If Dionia becomes stronger, won't the other city-states of the Southern Alliance be afraid?" Cypros had not completely recovered from his excitement. He took a big gulp of wine and said without hesitation, "No matter what the other city-states think, I think the strength of Dionia is a good thing for Elia. We are tired of the frequent wars between the city-states and the invasion of the Briti. The stronger Dionia is, the more peace it can bring to this land. After all, from the past practice of Dionia, it has always been friendly to its allies, unless you take the initiative to invade it. It is far less brutal than Syracuse in the south. Khanios understood what Cypros meant by brutal. After Dionysius conquered the Greek city-states of Sicily, he sometimes slaughtered the local residents and turned the remaining captives into slaves. This had never been done in the history of the Western Mediterranean, and it greatly shocked the Greeks of Sicily and Magna Graecia. So even though Khanios was far away in Elia, he had heard of it. He looked at Cypros across the table, and thought maliciously, is Dionysius's brutality also one of the main reasons why the southern city-states are willing to form an alliance with Dionia? He asked curiously. The regime of Dionia is so special that I'm sure all the southern city-states, including Trine, should have noticed it. Have any city-states tried to implement these laws of Dionia that are beneficial to the expansion of the city-states? Cypros was stunned for a moment before he smiled bitterly. During today's celebration, I had a brief conversation with a few members of the Crotone Council that I know about this topic. It's basically impossible. Do you think the citizens of the city would agree to it? Khanios suddenly realized that the conservative and xenophobic citizens of the Greek city-state would never allow outsiders to share the wealth and power of the city. And the highest authority of the city-state, the Citizens' Assembly, was made up of most of the citizens of the city-state. They would never allow these unfavorable proposals to pass. Why can Dionia do it? Khanios asked. Well, Cypros gently tapped the table and said thoughtfully, I don't know the details, but the great power and prestige of the archons and devers of Dionia is undoubtedly the most important reason. Khanios agreed with this point, but it was impossible for an archon like the devers to appear in Elia. But, Cypros looked at Khanios and said hesitantly, there are still some problems with a new city-state alliance like Dionia. What problems? Khanios asked anxiously. Cypros looked back, and the waiter was already standing behind him. He shook his head and said no more. The next morning, the ceremony for the completion of the Temple of Hades was still going on. This time, it was hosted by the high priest of the Devers and the Devers in the name of Hades, granting freedom to the slaves of the Alliance. As this was the first time the ceremony was held, not many slaves were released. Most of them were the Devers who had performed well in the past year, while the private slaves were mostly from the Devers families. As the territory of the Dionia Alliance expanded, the bank and restaurant opened by Christoia were also expanding rapidly. At the same time, she was constantly opening up new business channels, such as Christoia's shop, which mainly sold school supplies for the newly built schools of Dionia, as well as rugby and soccer equipment. For this reason, she bought a large number of slaves to ensure sufficient labor, and at the same time, granted freedom to the slaves who performed well. On the one hand, she wanted to use them as an example to give hope to other slaves and encourage them to work harder. On the other hand, the Devers, as the archons, led the people to treat their slaves kindly, in order to ease the conflict between the slaves and their masters in the Dionia Alliance and the society as a whole. Among the slaves released by the Devers was Christoia's personal maid, Asuna. Asuna had previously told Christoia that even if she was free, she was still willing to continue to serve Christoia as an employee. Christoia, of course, welcomed her very much. In fact, apart from the change in her identity, Asuna's lifestyle was not much different from before, including her salary. That was because Christoia had long given her close slave money. Because the domestic slaves spent a long time with their masters, they often developed a family-like relationship. So it was not uncommon for the slaves to be released before their masters died, or for the slaves to continue to serve their masters after they were freed. However, for the freed slaves of Dionia, there was one more thing they had to do as soon as possible, and that was to immediately apply to the Alliance's Household Registration Officer for probationary citizenship. After the slave liberation ceremony, it was the beginning of a joyous celebration. The play, paid for by the Alliance and free for the people to watch, would be performed non-stop for 3 consecutive days in a newly built theater in the city of Turin. If it was in Athens, there would be countless people lining up to grab the number plate and rush to get in to watch the show. But in Dionia, especially in Turin, the people were more interested in the Dionia rugby tournament. Last year, only the 4 cities of Amendolara, Turin, Nudum, and Laus participated in the tournament, attracting the attention of countless people. This year, Cremissa, Castellan, Aspustum, and even Grimentum, which had just joined the Alliance, had formed a team to participate, mainly composed of soldiers who had migrated from Legio III to Grimentum. The expansion of the participating teams made the competition more intense, and at the same time, the opening ceremony was more formal. The VIPs from the various city-states of the Ionian Alliance and the Southern Alliance had all received invitations. When the entire arena was filled to the brim, a loud bronze horn sounded in the arena, and the players from each city entered the arena one by one and circled around the arena. The people cheered enthusiastically, especially when they saw the players from their own city. When Amicris saw the Castellan players line up and pass the main stand, he applauded and said loudly to the people around him, "Look, those are our Castellan players. At the front is Gorky's, look at them, they are as strong as a herd of Lucanian bulls." The people around him laughed good-naturedly. The 3 Cremissa senators, Antalis, Eurypus, and Priades, who had just entered the Senate, did not understand why the chief general of Castellan was so excited. Cunegurata smiled and explained to them in a low voice, "During the rugby match last year, we also invited Castellan, but Laus participated, while Castellan did not. So many people made fun of them and said, 'The people of Castellan are timid and weak by nature, and they dare not participate in this kind of intense men's game.' It seems that these words really provoked them, and this year, they specially formed a team to prove themselves. Even their general, Gorkys, has personally participated. For the 3 of them who had never watched a game, they could not understand the enthusiasm and madness shown by the people of Dionia, but they were also infected by the fanatical atmosphere around them. Like the other VIPs of the city, they applauded the players who were marching on the field. Then, they saw the team representing Cremissa. Because the wooden sign held up by the leading player was engraved with the dazzling red letters, Cremissa, most of the team of more than 50 people were unfamiliar faces. Antalis knew that for the past few months, there had been citizens and prospective citizens of Dionia moving to Cremissa because of the distribution of land. Therefore, even if they had only joined the Dionia Federation for a short period of time, the skills of this team would not be too bad. Antalis also saw a few familiar faces in the team. Like the other players, their faces were full of excitement. They chatted cordially with their teammates and kept waving to the audience outside the field. These former citizens of Cremissa had now become citizens of Dionia. It had only been a few months, but they had already naturally integrated into this team. Antalis had mixed feelings for a moment. "Sir Antalis, I'm looking forward to seeing the performance of the Cremissa players." Cunegurata's meaningful words brought Antalis back to his senses. "Don't worry, they will definitely perform better than Castellan," Antalis said, pretending to be relaxed. The few of them laughed. The 8 teams finally stood in the middle of the field. At this time, the Devers stood up from the spectators' stand, and the originally bustling arena gradually quietened down. The VIPs of the Southern Alliance were shocked and envious. The great prestige of the Devers among the people of Dionia was evident. Chapter 268. The Devers' speech was met with thunderous applause. The passionate players and the audience outside the stadium sang Hades' song. After that, the teams hurriedly exited the field, and the rugby match officially began. According to the new rules of the tournament, the 8 teams were divided into 2 groups, A and B. last year's champion and runner-up, Turin and Armendalara, were seeded into two groups, and the rest of the teams would draw lots to decide where to go. In the end, the members of Group A were Turin, Nudum, Cremissa, and Grimentum, and the members of Group B were Armendalara, Laus, Castellan, and Asprustum. The two groups were played in a single round robin. A win was worth 1 point, and a loss was worth 0 points. There were no draws. Teams with the same number of points would see who won and lost. The top 2 teams in each group would advance and enter the knockout round to determine the champion. In order to get off to a good start, the Devers deliberately chose Turin and Nudum, a match of similar strength, as the opening game to attract the audience's attention. When the two teams, Turin and Nudum, re-entered the field, the crowd cheered thunderously. The audience was mostly Turin. Of course, they cheered for their city's team, while most of the Lucanians cheered for Nudum. In their cheers, the names of Tiger Telos and Lazaru were mentioned the most, because one was a strong and powerful running forward, and the other was a flexible and fast running forward. Both were famous scorers on their respective teams. In the audience, Bagul watched enviously. He shouted loudly and stamped his feet, completely lacking the steadiness of a powerful Senate elder. If it weren't for the fact that he had just become the governor of the Grimentum and was busy with work and had no time to train with the team, he would never have been a spectator outside the field. Next to him, Assist saw through his thoughts and teased him. Now that you are the governor of the Grimentum, you should support the Grimentum team. Nudum is the main opponent for the Grimentum to enter the knockout round. You should hope that they lose. Bagul glared at him, and then really fell into a dilemma. The referee blew the piccolo and the match officially began. As a strong country in Greece, even though Dionia's rugby competition was already well known in Greece, the Crotone people still disdained it. As the game progressed, the invited Crotone VIPs began to be attracted by the ferocious collisions and confrontations. Even the Crotone General Escamas, the Navy commander who had been gossiping about the game, stopped mocking them. The strict organization, reasonable rules, the unique ball game of this era, and the exciting sports scene had shocked the general who had represented Crotone in the 4 major tournaments many times in his younger days. He exclaimed, "I didn't expect rugby to be such a sport. It's much more interesting than the stone ball tossing game that the Sparta people play. It's very interesting. It's very suitable for us Crotone people to participate in." "Why?" someone beside him asked. "Look, there are a lot of people on the field. Although the scene looks chaotic, it's basically 2 types of sports, offense and defense." Escamas pointed to the field and analyzed with reason. To do these 2 things, the players who participate in the game must have great strength, speed, and not be afraid of collisions. These are exactly what we Crotone athletes are good at. Escamas's proud words attracted the nods of the Crotone people around him. Crotone's athletes have been dominating in wrestling and boxing for a long time, and they have a wealth of experience in training athletes' strength and explosive power. When we go back, we should persuade the Citizens' Assembly to let the Crotone people start practicing rugby too. Next year, we'll also participate in this competition and defeat these Dionia teams. Escamas looked around at the cheering Dionia crowd around him, a hint of anger hidden in his eyes. At this moment, Turin's Tiger Telos scored a touchdown with the ball. The crowd cheered thunderously, which made Escamas's heart itch even more. Sir Escamas is right. Next year, we'll also participate and defeat the Dionia people. Some of the Crotone people said in unison. Being defeated by the Dionia people made these proud Crotone people feel aggrieved. Like Escamas, they wanted to win back their dignity on the field to prove the strength of the Crotone people. Lysias listened to the discussion of his companions and frowned. His mind was not completely attracted by the game, but he was thinking about some deeper issues. The whole of Greece had 4 traditional games and a famous Pan-Athens festival. Athletes from all the city-states of Greece were very enthusiastic to participate. They were much more active than the Greek city-states along the coast of Asia Minor. In every Olympia, Greek athletes performed well. However, Greece itself did not have an influential sports event. The sports-loving Crotone people once tried to organize a sports event even if only the city-states of Greece participated, but it failed. On the one hand, Crotone's influence was not enough, and the Greeks did not agree with it. On the other hand, many city-states had long-term conflicts of interest and could not reach an agreement. As a result, this became a regret for the Crotone people. Now, although the Dionia Rugby Union was only a single competition, it included so many cities in Greece, and it seemed to attract more city-states to participate. This made Lysias vaguely see the shadow of a regional competition. Was this a coincidence? Or was it intentional by the Dionia people? Lysias looked at the figures of the Devers in the front row. Through the past 2 days of contact, the seemingly gentle young consul gave him an unfathomable feeling. In just a few months, Dionia not only stabilized the situation in the newly occupied Asplustum and Cremissa, but also recently occupied a large city in Lucania municipality, Grimentum. The Citizens' Assembly of Crotone was still arguing over a series of issues, such as whether the new residents of Asplustum would be granted full citizenship and the redivision of the war-damaged land of the Croton Plain. At first, Lysias wanted to get through this difficult period and let Crotone rise again. However, after more and more contact with Dionia, every time he compared the fast-developing Dionia with the stagnant Crotone, Lysias almost lost confidence. If this continued, Crotone would be left far behind by Dionia. But he could do nothing but worry, unable to do anything. Crotone's democracy had always been like this. He had studied why Dioria's governance was so efficient, but these methods could not be implemented in Crotone. Sometimes he also thought that joining the Southern Alliance might be the best thing that Crotone did. Hearing Escamaz's words, Lysias laughed at their childishness in his heart. Even if Crotone really did send a team next year, so what if they beat Dionia? Whether they won or lost, Dionia would be the big winner. On the third day, when the rugby match was still in full swing, the messenger of Elia, Canios, was received by the Devers. The young Archon received him cordially, while Canhos, who had gained a deeper understanding of the Dionian alliance over the last 2 days, had cast aside his initial restraint and reserve, and the two had a friendly conversation. The Devers listened carefully to Canios talk about Elia's current predicament, and learned from Canios about the situation in the Campania region and the Simonians. The conversation was pleasant, and in the end, an alliance agreement was reached. Elia joined the Dionia alliance. After signing the alliance agreement, Canios could finally relax because the Devers solemnly promised that if any force dared to invade Elia, Dionia would immediately send troops to help the Elia alliance and repel the enemy. At the same time, the Devers also hinted that when Dionia took action in Lucania municipality in the future, they hoped that Elia could actively cooperate with them. Canios happily realized that he finally saw the hope of solving the nightmare that had plagued Elia for decades. The feeling of having a strong force behind him was really reassuring. When Canios walked out of the living room, he was in a good mood. Then, he saw a man walking towards him, smiling and waving at him. "Why is Cypros here?" Canios returned the greeting, but he was puzzled. "Sir, since we have formed an alliance with Elia, do we still need to talk to the messengers of Picassus, Potentia, and Galagusso?" Aristocrates asked curiously. "What do you think?" The Devers looked at Canios' back as he left, feeling very relaxed. Elia joining the alliance made him feel that he was one step closer to his goal of unifying Lucania. "I think we should take advantage of the fact that Picassus and Portentia's strength is weakened and that they still don't know that Elia has joined the alliance to launch a sudden attack. We should be able to easily take down either Picassus or Portentia." Aristocrates had followed the Devers for a long time, and he had more or less learned how to reap the most benefits with the least casualties. But the Devers gently shook his head and did not agree with him. Your ambush strategy is indeed good. But it is not suitable to carry it out at this time. Why, my lord? Aristocrati anxiously asked, somewhat dissatisfied. Chapter 269. Aristotle knew that the Devers were referring to the Turii tragedy. 2 years ago, the Turii fought back against the Lucarians and entered the mountains. In the end, all of them perished at the banks of the Ra River. He thought about it and felt a little reluctant. But it's such a pity to miss such a good opportunity. Aristotle. The Devers smiled. Let me ask you, is Dionia stronger, or is Picassus and Potentia stronger? Of course it's Dionia. Even if Picassus and Potentia join forces, they won't be a match for us. Aristotle answered without hesitation. If that's the case, what we need to do is to chew it slowly like eating bread, Divers explained patiently. Once we take a bite, we need to chew it slowly until we're full. Instead of eating bite after bite and not swallowing it, we might choke in the end. That's right. I understand, my lord, Aristotle said sincerely. He was smart enough to understand what the Devers meant. They should first spend time and effort to establish a foothold in the center of Lucania municipality. Then, with the strength of Dionia, they could crush Picassus and Potentia. That's why we still need to negotiate with the emissaries of Picassus and Potentia. We need to sign a peace treaty with them to appease them and prevent them from causing trouble around the Grimentum. However, the duration of the treaty cannot be too long. The Devers' gentle tone revealed a hint of murderous intent. As for Galagusso, it's said that it's located deep in the mountains and rarely communicates with the outside world. Its living environment is rather harsh. We can consider forming an alliance with it and strengthen our trade. The Devers stopped talking when he heard a voice outside the living room. He smiled and said, "An interesting guest has arrived." An interesting guest? It was rare for Aristotle to hear the Devers give such an evaluation. He looked outside the door curiously. When the slave butler, Ribazot, let a person in, he suddenly realized that it was him. Cypros, a treen. When the emissaries from the southern states came to ask for help from Dionia, his lanky body was rather eye-catching. His actions were also noteworthy. Not only was he the emissary of the Crotone alliance that was proposed by Dionysia to form the Southern Alliance, he was the first to fully support it. Furthermore, Capus, the commander of the First Legion who was sent to reinforce Dionysia, mentioned in his report that Cypros, the emissary of Trenna, strongly requested to march with Dionysia's army and eat and sleep with the soldiers. It was said that during the Trine Citizens' Assembly, he also praised the Dionysian army's combat effectiveness and suggested that Trine and Dionia should strengthen their cooperation. Aristotle Cradle remembered that Divers had commented on Cypros after hearing about his performance. Cypros is a smart, observant, and adaptable man. Therefore, he was one of the guests specially invited by the Devers for the inauguration of the Temple of Hades. At this moment, the Devers stared at Cypros, thinking about the conversation between Cypros and the emissary from Christoa's restaurant last night. The Devers knew that after Dionia defeated the Crotone alliance and gradually became the most powerful force in southern Italy, it would naturally attract a lot of attention. And the unique political system of Dionia naturally could not escape the eyes of those who were observant, but there were not many who could analyze it as incisively as Cypros. Cypros, Dionia's best friend, welcome, said the Devers happily in a loud voice. I've been busy with the celebration for the past few days. I was thinking of inviting you after the celebration to express my gratitude, but I didn't expect. Cypros bowed respectfully and said, Lord Consul, I insisted on visiting you because I had no other choice. The city has urgently asked me to convey a proposal to you. Oh, what proposal? The Devers gestured for Cypros to sit down. Cypros glanced at Aristotle, wanting to say something but hesitated. Let me introduce you to Aristotle Clade, a very talented young man. He's my personal clerk. Actually, he's just a clerk, because he hasn't obtained the qualifications to become a probationary citizen. You can rest assured. Aristotle Clade was quite moved by Diver's words. Cypros nodded at him and sat on the wooden chair. He then asked, "Do you know about the Brudi, Lord Consul?" As soon as the Devers said that, they roughly understood the purpose of Cypros' visit. "I know a little about our neighbor to the west of the Dionia Alliance. The Brudi are the indigenous people of Italy. They also live in the form of tribes, but compared to the Lucaria, they are smaller in number and less of a threat to Dionia. I heard that they often attack the Trine." The Devers looked at Cypros with a faint smile and said, "Not only the Trine, they also attack Aspustum and southern Turii from time to time," Cypros reminded. "But after all, it's rare, and since the establishment of the Dionia Alliance, the Brudi have completely stopped harassing us," the Devers said with a relaxed expression. "In fact, since last year, the Brudi suddenly stopped attacking all the Greek city-states. This is not just because the Crotone, the Silitans and our Trine alliance had dealt a heavy blow to the Brudi." Cypros paused for a moment. He felt the Devers' eyes focusing on him. He deliberately raised his voice and said, "It's because there's been a major change within the Brudi." "What change?" The Devers' heart skipped a beat, but he still said calmly, "The Trine alliance borders the Brudi's town of Canopetia. They have been fighting with the Brudi for years, so they are relatively familiar with them and have some sources of information." Cypros' expression became solemn. "Last year, we received news that the leaders of the Brudi tribes have gathered in the city of Cosenza and have been discussing the formation of a tribal alliance. Is this true?" The Devers was shocked and could not help but lean forward. It was no wonder that he was a little impatient. The reason why he pretended to be indifferent before was because when he knew that Cypros' visit this time was related to the Brudi, he did not want to appear too enthusiastic and lose too much leverage in the discussion of the future attack on the Brudi. After all, the Brudi could not pose a huge threat to Dionia like the Lucanians. As far as he knew, in the small mountainous area occupied by the Brudi, their tribe had always been divided. The northern tribe centered around the city of Vigo, because it bordered Laos, so they used to have a close relationship with the Lucanians, and they were present when the Lucanian tribal coalition invaded Turii. The central tribe centered around the big city of Cosenza, which was the most powerful. In the east, along the upper reaches of the Kratai River, lived some other Brudi tribes. They built the small city of Abyssinia, and they used to cross the mountains to plunder the southern part of the Zbari plain. In the southeast of Cosenza, there was another small city called Albania, which was said to have been built by the tribes who escaped from the first city of Aspustium when it fell to the Crotone. And in the south of Cosenza, there was the city of Napetia, which bordered Trine and was also the culprit of the invasion of Trine. The Brudi Mountains had high mountains, dense forests, rugged roads, and the only plateau in southern Italy. The city of Vigo and the city of Napetia guarded the narrow road to the north and south of the west coast by the sea. Abyssinia and Albania blocked the only mountain road to the east coast, making this area a barricade. Since they claimed to be the habitat of the Brudi, it had always been the Brudi who rushed out of the mountains and harassed others. They had almost never been invaded, but there were more internal tribal wars. Most of the wars were provoked by Cosenza. The most powerful one wanted to annex other tribes, except for Clypaetia, which had a close relationship with Cosenza and remained neutral. Vigo, Abyssinia, and Albania often joined forces to fight against Cosenza. It was because the frequent intertribal wars had consumed the strength of the Brudi, so they were not too much of a threat to the Greek city-states. Now, the Brudi, who had always been in dispute, wanted to establish a tribal alliance, which greatly increased the threat to the Greeks, especially Dionia, whose territory bordered the Brudi Mountains. "Of course it's true," Cypros said affirmatively, "because in May of this year, the Brudi tribal alliance has been established. It is reported that the Brudi tribes elected Pinlan, the great chief of Cosenza, as the great chief of the new alliance." the great chief of Vigo, Sidorum, the great chief of Abyssinia, Bergam, the great chief of Albania and Pangam, the great chief of Clepatia, will be the elders of the alliance. With Cosenza as the center of the tribal alliance, all the Briti tribes will be governed. After listening to Cypros's words, Devers could no longer sit still. He involuntarily stood up, and while pacing slowly, he asked in a deep voice, "Where did you get this information from?" Seeing the Devers's reaction, Cypros knew that this matter had attracted the attention of the highest authority in Dionia, and he immediately felt relieved. But he did not know that the reason why the Devers cared so much about this matter was not only because the formation of a tribal alliance by the Briti may pose a danger to the territory of the Dionia alliance, but more importantly, the Devers had long considered the problem of the Briti. Chapter 270. The other powerful state of Greater Greece, Lygium, was far away on the toes of Italy. It remained neutral in the disputes of Greater Greece, and cared more about the shipping trade than the hegemony. Locri had a grudge against Dionia, but Dionia was separated by the southern Italian alliance. A single Crotone was more than enough for Locri to handle. Dionia only needed a little reinforcement, and Locri would not be able to handle it. As for his backer, Syracuse, it was still entangled with Carthage for a short period of time, and had no spare energy to pay attention to the land north of Sicily. Therefore, if the Devers wanted to turn southern Italy into the most stable stronghold of the Dionia alliance, the only thing they had to consider was the Briti. The area where the Briti lived was high, not fertile, and not close to the sea. It was not coveted by the people, but because of its existence, the territory of Dionia, from Asprustum to Grimentum, had become a slender S-shape. Especially in the east, Asprustum, Cremissa, Castellan, Turiae, and Amendola, cities were lined up along the coast, forming a long and narrow corridor. To the Greeks who loved the sea, this was nothing out of the ordinary. But to divers who had been nurtured for more than 2,000 years, he felt deeply uneasy. Such a territory was too flat without any depth, and the coastline was too long. If a powerful enemy were to invade, any place would become a target for the enemy. Furthermore, Diolia's army would have to march through the narrow territory to provide reinforcements. This would also lengthen the army's supply line, making it an easy target for the enemy to attack. This had already shown its disadvantages in the war with Crotone. Therefore, when the Dionia navy was formed, the Devers set their sights on the Briti Mountains. Although the transportation between the Briti Mountains and Dionia's territory was not very convenient, if they had it, Dionia's territory in southern Italy would become a piece of land. The valley trail north of Asprustum, the mountain trail north of Turiae, and the mountain trail south of the Crati River could all be converted into a passage between Dionia and Briti. Needless to say, the soldiers of Grimentum and Nudum could directly cross the west coast of the Briti Mountains and reach Trine. Besides, the Briti were weak and disunited, so they were easier to conquer. The Devers originally planned to wait for the three territories of Asprustum, Cremissa, and Grimentum to stabilize before launching the plan against the Briti people. Some time ago, the Devers also asked Isam to send someone to Briti to inquire about the news, but they did not expect the Briti people to be so heavily guarded, and Isam's mountain scouts basically did not know the Briti language. Not only did they not get any news, but they also lost a few men. The Devers had to suspend the reconnaissance, but they did not expect the Trine messenger, Cypros, to bring them shocking news. The Briti region is different from Lucania, it is surrounded by Greek city-states, Cypros said seriously. So every year, some Greeks or slaves escape to Briti because of a series of reasons such as crime, persecution by political enemies, and so on, and gradually formed a unique tribe there. Many years ago we, the Trine, had a close relationship with this tribe. We secretly sold them some goods that they urgently needed, and they passed us some news in the mountains. With this tribe, the Trine had many times prevented the attacks of the Briti people in advance, and this time, They have been contacting us very anxiously for a few days, because the alliance of the Briti tribes threatens their survival, so there is no doubt that this news is true." Cypros emphasized again. The Devers was quite surprised. "What is the name of this tribe?" "Shiloh, which means Helen." The Devers nodded. There was no need to ask Cypros. He could also guess that such a tribe of Greeks could survive in that mountainous area. They must have taken advantage of the disputes between the tribes, or even acted as mercenaries or black market traders. Now that the Briti people had completed the integration, this tribe of foreigners would lose the soil to survive. There was still a question in the Devers' mind. Why did the Briti people not form an alliance like the Lucania, but centralize the power? Won't the other tribes object? After listening, Cypros showed a trace of a bitter smile, looked at the Devers, and said, "I don't know the specific reason. Maybe it secretly learned from its neighbors. At least so far, there has not been any major unrest in the Briti region." The Devers heard the mockery in Cypros' words, and he was shocked. The previous Lucania tribal alliance was a loose organization. Each tribe had their own interests, and it was impossible for them to really centralize their power, so the danger to Dionia was much less. But if they were to be like Dionia, able to highly centralize their power, then it would be worth Dionia's vigilance. The Devers sat back in his chair, looked at Cypros, and said seriously, "The Trine Council sent you to tell me this news. Do you have any suggestions?" Cypros had experienced the Devers' style of speaking the last time, so he did not beat around the bush and said frankly, "The Trine Council hopes that Dionia can take the lead and lead the Southern Alliance to take the initiative to attack the Briti, and before the Briti tribal alliance becomes a real threat, destroy it and restore peace to the people of Greece." The Southern Alliance. The Devers whispered, touched his chin, and pondered for a while before saying, "Starting a war is a big deal, especially against a big force like the Briti. What's more, Dionia just ended the war not long ago, so I'm afraid it will take some time for the Senate to make a decision on this issue." Cypros nodded in understanding. "In that case, Cypros, you should stay in Thurii for a while, and get a good feel of the life of the Dionia people. At the same time, it will be convenient for us to discuss the issue of attacking the Briti with you at any time." The Devers invited Cypros, and he immediately agreed. He smiled and said, "Thurii is a city completely different from other Greek city-states. I like the architecture, the tidiness, and more importantly, the food here is not available anywhere else." The Devers laughed, and until Cypros left, he did not ask Cypros what he said in Kristoya's restaurant, "What is the flaw of the political system of Dionia?" Because he did not want others to know that the Devers had eyes and ears everywhere in Thurii, because no one liked the feeling of being watched all the time. In fact, this practice of the Devers was not the first in this era. As early as 70 years ago, the successor of the tyrant Glen of Syracuse, Thyaron, had once implemented a secret agent system, which caused great resentment among the people. Of course, the Devers who cared about their reputation would not be stupid enough to expose these dark side. In fact, there was no need to ask. He was very clear about the biggest problem of the current political system of Dionia. After the Senate of Dionia deliberately did not hold a citizens' assembly, ordinary citizens did not have the opportunity to participate in politics. If this was in Persia, this would not be a problem at all. But this was Greece, and the enthusiasm of the Greek citizens to participate in politics was well known among the Mediterranean countries and city-states. Even the most conservative oligarchy, Sparta, allowed its citizens to express their opinions on the laws and proposals enacted. Of course, it was not through voting, but through the strength of their voices in support of yes or no. The reason why the political situation in Dionia was stable now was that the Greek cities in the Union of Dionia had suffered a sharp decline in population after the war. The remaining people were still busy repairing their homes, and the fear of war made them yearn for strong protection. The army under the command of the Devers gave them a great sense of security. On the other hand, the native freedmen, who made up the majority of the population, had always been on the periphery of the city-states. They were busy making a living and had no right to participate in the affairs of the city-states, so they did not develop the habit of participating in politics, nor were they enthusiastic about politics. Not to mention the citizens of Lucaria, who used to be under the control of the elders and chiefs in their tribes, but now in the Union of Dionia, the Senate decided everything, so they did not feel any discomfort. The Devers knew that this stable situation would not last forever. When the Union of Dionia became stronger and the people became wealthier, they would probably have higher expectations. But the Devers were not worried about this. He had already taken the corresponding measures to deal with it. Now, it was better to let the people of Dionia continue to familiarize themselves with the existing system until they got used to it. At the end of July, Dionysius led the Syracuse army to launch a full-scale attack on Moscha, the core town of Carthage in Sicily. The causeway they built from the coast had already connected to the small island where Moscha was located in the bay. The siege weapons could be directly transported to the city, so the fierce siege began. The Moschans used bows, arrows, javelins, and threw burning tar to kill and injure the soldiers of Syracuse. The Syracuse used dozens of ballistae to bombard the walls of Moscha, forcing the defenders to stand on the walls. After a few days of fierce fighting, the siege hammers used by the Syracuse people smashed a big hole in the walls of Moscha. The army of Syracuse rushed in, and the walls of Moscha fell. Dionysius was very excited. He thought that victory was already in his hands, but who knew that the bloody battle had just begun? Chapter 271. The city of Moscha was small, but as Carthage's most important stronghold in Sicily, it had a large population. In order to ensure that everyone had a place to live, the residents of Moscha had to build their houses high, usually 6 or 7 stories high, like a steeple. When the Syracuse soldiers entered the city, they were shocked to find that the residents of Moscha not only had no intention of surrendering, but also stubbornly guarded every street and every house. When the soldiers wanted to break through the barricades of the streets, the residents of Moscha could throw stones, javelins, and even boiling water and hot oil from the upper floors of the houses, which caused a large number of casualties to the Syracuse soldiers. Dionysius had to stop the offensive, gather countless engineers, and spend time building siege towers as high as Moscha's houses. It was 6 stories high, had wheels under it, and was huge. When everything was ready, the Syracuse people launched another attack. 10 siege towers were pushed by a large number of laborers from the east, west, south, and north of the city along the widened gaps in the walls and roads into the city of Moscha. They slowly approached the houses, lowered the bridge at the top, and put it on the roof of the houses. The Syracuse soldiers used the wooden ladder in the tower to reach the exit, trying to break into the houses through the bridge. The residents of Moscha threw burning wood and asphalt at the siege towers, and desperately tried to stop the enemy from entering. And so, the strangest scene in the siege of Moria happened. Both sides were fighting in midair. Broken limbs and blood rained down from the sky. There were even soldiers and residents covered in fire, falling from buildings that were more than 10 meters high. Screams rang out, and the ground was littered with corpses. Due to the desperate fight of the residents of Moscha, Syracuse's attack made little progress, and the battle was in a stalemate. In Sparta, the new king Agesilaus and the elders were now not in the mood to pay attention to the war in Asia Minor, because a conspiracy that threatened their rule was exposed. Cynodon, a former citizen of Sparta, could no longer enjoy the privileges of Sparta citizens because he could no longer afford to pay for public meals, and was demoted to a second-class person. At first, he only wanted to retaliate against the nobles of Sparta out of hatred, but after a long period of observation and constant contact with other ruling classes in the Sparta territory, he gradually realized how terrible the inhumane slaughter and oppression of the Sparta system was, and how unfair it was to the second-class people and pariathai who also contributed sweat and blood to the city. So he decided to overthrow the rule of the Sparta nobles. During this period, with the frequent war, the citizens of Sparta, Pariathai, and even the Pariathai were constantly conscripted to fight in the war. The land in the country gradually became barren due to the lack of labor, but the city's tax burden was increasing, causing people of all classes to become dissatisfied with Sparta. Therefore, under Cynodon's secret communication and propaganda, a large number of people in the Sparta territory were inspired by his ideas and joined his organization, including the frustrated citizens of Sparta. As time went by, the number of people in this rebel organization increased day by day. Just when they were ready to take some action, out of fear, some of the participants informed the Council of Elders. The king, the elders, and the censors were shocked when they heard the news. Because of the urgency of the situation, they hastily held an informal meeting and decided to send Cynodon and some young people to the towns in the suburbs to carry out a cleansing operation. The so-called cleansing operation was an official, public, and legal operation that the government of Sparta was worried about the overpopulation of the Pariathai and Sparta's rule. Not only did it remind the Pariathai of the terror of Sparta, but it also trained the young citizens of Sparta to have a thirst for blood. Cynodon did not doubt the order. Instead, he was happy. It was not because he had the right to kill any Pariathai he encountered, but because he felt that with the right to roam freely, he could take the opportunity to contact the organization and start a riot. But his thinking was too simple, and he lacked vigilance. As a result, not long after he left the city, he was secretly arrested by the Sparta soldiers who had been lying in ambush. The people of Sparta, who had been oppressing the Pariathai for many years, were very experienced in torture. After being tortured, Cynodon finally revealed some of the important leaders of the organization. While the censors searched the city for the rebels, they also escorted Cynodon around the city. At the same time, they announced to the onlookers that Cynodon was a despicable traitor who wanted to incite the Pariathai to start a riot, overthrow the rule of Sparta, steal the wealth of Sparta, and become king himself. Cynodon didn't even have a chance to defend himself. As soon as he opened his mouth, the Spartan warriors would whip his body and hit his mouth with a wooden stick with iron thorns. Cynodon's body was covered in blood. Under the angry and contemptuous eyes of the people, he staggered and fell to the ground, dead. The Sparta government succeeded in physically destroying Cynodon, discrediting him, and making the Sparta people who didn't know the truth hate these rebels. But there were too many people involved in the conspiracy, and the incident was far from over. The two kings, the elders, and the censors were busy stabilizing the situation in the country. The rugby tournament in Dionia lasted for more than 10 days. The exciting games and fierce confrontations not only made the people of Dionia and their allies crazy, but also attracted the foreign merchants who came to trade in Thurii. When it came to the semi-finals, not only was the arena full, but there were also countless people outside the arena clamoring to go in and watch the game. The governor Cunigarata urgently increased the number of patrols to strengthen the order of the arena and avoid accidents. The final was still between the two strong teams, Thurii and Amendolara. From the whistle to the end, the audience stood and cheered for the two teams. In the end, Amendolara won by a narrow margin and avenged last year's defeat. When the disappointed audience was about to leave the arena, the game host announced loudly, "Next, there will be a football exhibition game to thank the people for their full support." Football, as the name suggested, was a ball played with feet. But how could one play a game with feet? Many of the audience who had not seen this sport before sat down to watch again with doubt and curiosity. The staff in the arena moved the goal and redrew the line with lime powder. Just as the audience and friends who knew about the situation whispered, the players from both sides went on the field, and the referee stood in the middle of the field holding a real round ball. The whistle blew and the game began. The audience was surprised to find that the round ball could bounce on the ground, and the players could touch the ball with their feet and other parts of their bodies, but not with their hands, which was the opposite of rugby. The audience widened their eyes in amazement when they saw the players controlling the ball with their feet, making all kinds of wonderful movements, and dribbling the ball past their opponent. The audience could not help but cheer in unison when they saw the players dribbling the ball like the wind and scoring with great force. When the audience really began to immerse themselves in the game, some people had already realized that Dionia had invented another ball game that was not inferior to rugby, and it would definitely become popular in the Dionia Federation and Greece. At the end of the game host announced, "On the founding day of the nation next year, a football match will be held in Dionia to celebrate." The audience left the arena reluctantly. For a period of time after that, the topic of their conversation revolved around the rugby match and the football match to be held next year. While the businessmen thought about the business opportunities brought by this grand game, they brought these novel topics to other ports and cities. The reputation of the Dionia ball game was slowly expanding its influence in Greece. Just at the end of the football match, the senators in the Senate Hall looked solemn. Originally, they were only discussing whether to start a war against Britain, but who knew that Tarentum had sent an envoy? Previously, Tarentum had gathered a large number of troops to capture Manduria, a stronghold specially built by the Masapi people to attack Tarentum. Then, they spent a few months and paid a huge price to acquire the important port city of Brindisi of the Masapi people, causing Tarentum's territory to suddenly double. Despite the joy, the people of Tarentum did not dare to be careless. Although the Masapi people had been hit hard, they would never give up. Hundreds of years of competition with the Masapi people had taught the people of Tarentum a deep understanding of the habits of this race, so Tarentum sent more soldiers to the newly occupied city, and at the same time stepped up the repair of the city's defenses. For a few months the Apulia region, the area known as the heel of Italy, had been calm. According to the estimation of the existing strength of the Masapi people and the geographical location and importance of Brindisi and Manduria, the Senate of Tarentum had considered it in detail in advance, so they let the young Urchita lead more soldiers to guard Brindisi, which was further away from Tarentum and more important. They did not deploy too many troops in Manduria, which was only 40 miles away from Tarentum, because the troops of Tarentum and Brindisi could come to reinforce at any time, and with the strength of the Masapi people, it was impossible to focus on attacking two towns at the same time. On the morning of the 5th day after the start of the Hades celebration, Archita, who was inspecting the construction progress at the port of Brindisi, received a messenger from the Senate of Tarentum. Manduria was attacked by the Masapi people? How many people? Archita was a little surprised. Chapter 272. The messenger continued to relay the Senate's order. Sir Diomyras believes that the Masapi army attacking Manduria is probably the last force of the Masapi. Therefore, the Senate orders you to return with as many soldiers as possible while ensuring the safety of Brindisi. Rendezvous with the reinforcements from Heraclea and Metapontum, march to Manduria, and completely defeat the Masapi. Completely ensure the safety of the newly occupied territory. Archita lowered his head and pondered. Previously, in the battle for Manduria and Brindisi, Tarentum paid nearly 5,000 casualties, and the casualties of the Masapi would not be lower than Tarentum's. This could be seen from the Masapi corpses buried after the battle. Although there were 7 or 8 city-states in the Masapi alliance, the only big city was Rudii. To be able to send tens of thousands of troops, the manpower of Masapi should have been stretched to its limit. But why did they not attack Brindisi, which was wedged into the territory of the Masapi, but Manduria, which was closer to Tarentum and easier to be rescued? But on second thought, he immediately scolded himself for being muddle-headed. Brindisi was guarded by 8,000 Tarentum militia, while Manduria only had 2,000. It was obvious which city was easier to capture. He looked up at the messenger who was still waiting for his reply and asked, "How many people did Metapontum and Heraclea send?" Due to their heavy losses the last time, it is said that the two cities only sent 3,000 people this time, the messenger replied. Archita's expression was slightly gloomy. He had fought side by side with the alliance before, of course. He knew how their casualties were. But in the end, Tarentum enjoyed the victory alone, while Heraclea and Metapontum only received some rewards. However, didn't Dionia use this method to defeat their opponents and quickly grow stronger? Thinking of this, he no longer felt guilty. Instead, he was concerned about the city-state alliance across the bay that gave him mixed feelings. Did the Senate send an envoy to Dionia for help? The messenger wanted to say something but stopped. He shook his head with a strange expression. Archita's thoughts turned and he immediately understood that it was not only Diomedes, one of the newly elected consuls this year, who had always been averse to the alliance of Dionia. The others also had the same mentality. As a southern Italian city-state that had been established for 300 years, asking for help from a newly established city-state alliance that had only been established for less than 2 years was really a loss of face and honor. What would the alliance and the other city-states in Greece think? What's more, unlike Heraclea and Metapontum, Dionia served Tarentum as their master. On the other hand, Dionia and Tarentum were equal allies. Perhaps its overall strength was even stronger than Tarentum. If they asked for Dionia's help, they would have to pay a price. Therefore, Tarentum would never send messengers to Dionia unless it was a critical moment. Archita pondered for a moment and simply said, "I'm going to let Peberigius lead 2,000 soldiers to stay in Brindisi. I'll bring 6,000 people back. You'll come with me because I don't have enough cavalry to escort you back alone." The messenger breathed a sigh of relief and quickly agreed. He was frightened by the elusive light cavalry of the Masapi people. The cavalry team that escorted him sacrificed more than a dozen lives to send him safely to Brindisi. In the afternoon, the freedmen who heard the news came one after another and watched the 6,000 Tarentum militia leave the city anxiously. Although Tarentum looked down on the newly established city-state alliance of Dionia that had no historical background, it had begun to learn from Dionia on how to deal with the issue of occupied territory. After capturing the 2 towns, the Senate immediately promised the foreigners and freedmen in Tarentum that as long as they were willing to move to Brindisi and Manduria, they would get land and become citizens of Tarentum. Brindisi and Manduria would also become affiliated to Tarentum. Therefore, although they knew there was a risk, many freedmen still brought their families and gladly came. Now that the war had broken out again and more than half of Brindisi's defensive forces had left, how could they not be nervous? Between Brindisi on the east coast of Apulia and Tarentum on the west coast, there was an east-west mountain range. Other than that, the road was smooth. Therefore, Akita's army could reach Tarentum in 2 directions. One was to go north around the mountain range and head west to Tarentum, or go directly west, pass through Manduria, go around the mountain range, and reach Tarentum. Of course, Akita chose the former because the road to the north was very safe except for the only Masapi town, Igratia, that he needed to pay attention to. Choosing the latter meant that he had to always be vigilant against the surprise attacks of some Masapi towns that were hidden in the dense forest in the south with Udir as the center. Not long after Akita's army left the city, they went around the mountain range. At this time, a scout came to report that a small group of Masapi cavalry had been found spying nearby. Akita didn't pay much attention to it. Although Tarentum had taken Brindisi, on the road from Tarentum to Brindisi, there were still Masapi cavalry patrolling the area from time to time, affecting the flow of people and the transportation of goods between Tarentum and Brindisi. Tarentum had sent soldiers to attack these cavalry many times, but they ran away early because of the speed of their horses. When the troops returned without success, they appeared again. Tarentum couldn't do anything to these Masapi cavalry, so it could only consider waiting for Brindisi to be completely stabilized before continuously building new villages and strongholds between the 2 cities to completely occupy this area. Prior to this, Tarentum had specially formed troops to ensure the communication and transportation between the 2 cities. Heavy infantry and archers were able to deal with these swift cavalry, and Akita had done the same. After going around the mountain range, the terrain leading to Tarentum was flat and open. Akita divided the marching column into 5 columns, with a smaller number of light infantry in the middle and the heavily armored militia on the outside. The entire marching column was about 3 miles long. Tarentum and Brindisi were about 100 miles apart. Akita estimated that with the current speed of the new army, they could arrive in the evening. Akita controlled the marching speed of the troops and moved forward unhurriedly. However, as time went by, more and more Masapi cavalry appeared. They patrolled around the marching troops and killed Tarentum's scouts, causing Akita to have no choice but to recall the small number of cavalry, so he could no longer understand the surrounding situation outside of the troops' field of vision. As a commander, although Akita knew very well that after the last war, there were no powerful Masapi forces near the north of the hills between Brindisi and Tarentum, this feeling of being blind made him feel uneasy. He immediately ordered the troops to speed up and rush to Sigyon as soon as possible. Sigyon was a village to the north of Tarentum. Before Brindisi was captured, it was built into a small stronghold because it was adjacent to Masapi's territory. It had strong mud walls and many sentry towers to defend against the Masapi's invasion. The bugle was blown, and the officers who received the order began to urge the soldiers who were fooling around. At this moment, a loud bugle sounded at the front of the troops at the same time. The soldiers in the vanguard were stunned. Is it our army? This is the bugle to attack. Some of the soldiers had already begun to exclaim. Just as the troops were in an uproar, Akita's order came. Stop advancing. Immediately spread out the formation to the west with the light infantry in front and the heavy infantry at the back. The officers immediately took action and commanded the soldiers to start getting into formation. Akita rode to the front of the troops under the protection of the cavalry. 100 meters away, the loose Masapi cavalry stared at him like wolves, and he looked further ahead through the gaps of the enemy cavalry. He was puzzled. Now that the main force of the Masapi is in Manduria, if it is their army that is coming, how many soldiers can they spare to stop my troops from returning to Tarentum? Just as he was deep in thought, the marching column of Tarentum began to slowly spread out to the west. The officers and soldiers shouted at each other, looking for their positions, and the noise was earth-shattering. In front of the formation, Akita and the Masapi cavalry not far away were quietly confronting each other. They're here. Akita's eyelids twitched and he blinked hard, widening his eyes even more. A row of small black dots appeared on the horizon a few hundred meters away, gradually becoming bigger and longer. When the troops got closer, Akita and the others could see it more clearly. The same outfit with round shields, bronze helmets and spears, the same dense formation. But they could not be sure that it was Tarentum's troops because the Masapi soldiers were also equipped with the same equipment. This was the credit of the Athens people. When they got closer and could see the raised flag, the adjutant exclaimed, "General, it's Egratia's troops." Egratia was the northernmost city-state of the Masapi territory, adjacent to the territory of the Puccetti people. Every time there was a conflict between the Masapi and the Puccetti, Egratia was the first to bear the brunt. Therefore, as a border city, it had stronger military capabilities and was the closest to Brindisi. When Tarentum attacked Brindisi, the Egratia came as reinforcements, but were repelled by Akita. Akita also specially set up a sentry post in the northwest of Brindisi to monitor Egratia's movements. Now that Egratia's troops appeared here, and Akita did not receive any warning, it was obvious that the northern sentry post had met with an accident. At this moment, Akita was not in the mood to mourn. He stared at the enemy's formation, and with the mind of a mathematician, he quickly estimated that the enemy's strength was less than 3,000 people. Nearly 3,000 people dared to stop him from returning home? Akita did not feel relaxed, but he was even more puzzled.